Hello and welcome to Sleep Tales. I am so happy you are here with me tonight. Find a comfortable place to rest. Let the worries of the day begin to fade away. Tonight's story is a journey of loss, discovery, and finding a new path. I hope it brings you comfort and peace. If you enjoy our stories, please think about subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. It helps so much. I also love to see where everyone is listening from, so please leave a comment and say hello. Now close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the story begin. Sadie was 21 years old. She was an artist who did not have time to make art. Instead, she worked as a waitress in the North Star Diner. The diner belonged to her father, Arthur. It was an old place, but it was warm and familiar. The red vinyl on the booths was cracked in some places. The chrome on the counter was dull from years of use. It was the kind of place where the coffee was always hot and the people knew your name. The diner was the heart of their small town. For Sadie, it was also a cage. She loved her father more than anything, but she dreamed of seeing mountains and oceans and cities with tall buildings. She wanted to fill her sketchbooks with new places. Instead, she drew on the back of order pads when no one was looking. Arthur was a good man. He was a wonderful chef. His food made people happy. But now he was old and sick. The work of the diner had made him tired. His illness made him weak. The diner was not making enough money. They both knew it would have to close. A heavy sadness filled the air of the small diner, a quiet goodbye that had not been spoken yet. Chapter 1. The Last Closing Time. The last day of the North Star Diner was gray. The sky was the color of a dirty dishcloth. A slow rain fell, making the windows sweat. Each time the front door opened, a gust of damp air rushed inside. It smelled like wet leaves and cold pavement. Sadie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She moved through the diner like a ghost. Her feet knew the path between the tables. She did not have to think about where she was going. Her body just moved. She carried the heavy coffee pot from table to table. The coffee was dark and hot. The smell filled the diner. It was a smell that usually made her feel safe. Today, it just made her feel sad. The diner was busy. Many people came to say goodbye. They were not just customers. They were friends. They had been coming here for years. Mr. Henderson sat in his usual booth by the window. He was an old man with kind eyes. He had been eating breakfast at the diner every day for 30 years. He always ordered the same thing: 2 eggs, bacon, and toast. Sadie did not even have to write it down. She just told her father, the usual for Mr. Henderson. Today, he looked at his plate for a long time before he started eating. He told Sadie that he remembered when her father first opened the diner. He said Arthur was young and full of energy. He had a big smile and a loud laugh. Sadie tried to imagine her father that way. The man in the kitchen now was quiet and moved very slowly. Mr. Henderson said the diner was more than a place to eat. It was a place where people came together. He said the town would not be the same without it. Sadie just nodded. She did not know what to say. The lump in her throat was too big. Mrs. Gable sat at the counter. She was a small woman who always wore a bright blue coat. She came for lunch 3 times a week. She always ordered a bowl of Arthur's famous tomato soup. She told Sadie that the soup had healed her heart after her husband died. She said that on the coldest days, a bowl of that soup felt like a warm hug. She held her spoon and looked into her bowl of soup. She did not seem to be in a hurry to finish it. She wanted to make the moment last. She told Sadie that her father had a special gift. He did not just cook food. He cooked feelings. He put care into every single dish. Sadie knew this was true. She had watched him cook her whole life. He would hum a little song when he was happy. He would stir the soup with a steady, gentle rhythm. Today, the kitchen was silent except for the sound of pans and dishes. A young family sat in a booth in the corner. The parents had had their first date at this diner. Now they had 2 small children. The children were drawing on the paper placemats with crayons. Their little hands were sticky with syrup from their pancakes. The mother told Sadie that this place was part of their family's story. They came here for birthdays and celebrations. They came here when they needed a quiet place to be together. She looked around the room with tears in her eyes. She said, "Thank you for all the memories." Sadie smiled, but her smile did not feel real. It felt like a mask she was wearing. Each story, each kind word was like a small weight being placed on her chest. It was hard to breathe. Sadie moved back and forth from the kitchen to the dining room. In the dining room, people were talking and laughing and remembering. In the kitchen, her father was a silent shadow. Arthur worked with his head down. His face was pale. His chef's coat, usually perfectly white, looked too big for him. His shoulders were slumped. He did not look up when Sadie came in with new orders. He just took the little slips of paper and started cooking. His hands, which had always been so strong and sure, now trembled a little. He dropped a plate. It shattered on the floor. The sound was loud in the quiet kitchen. He did not say anything. He just bent down slowly to pick up the broken pieces. Sadie rushed to help him. She told him to be careful. She saw a small cut on his hand. He did not seem to notice. He just wrapped a cloth around it and kept working. She could see the deep pain in his eyes. It was not just the pain from his illness. It was the pain of letting go of his life's work. The hours passed slowly. The lunch rush ended. The diner grew quiet. A few people stayed, nursing their cups of coffee. They did not want to leave. Sadie did not want them to leave either. As long as they were there, the diner was still alive. But eventually, everyone had to go. Mr. Henderson was the last to leave. He stood at the door for a long moment. He put his hand on Sadie's shoulder. He said, "Take care of your father and take care of yourself." Then he walked out into the rain. Sadie locked the door behind him. She flipped the sign from open to closed. The click of the lock was the saddest sound she had ever heard. The diner was empty. It felt strange and wrong. The tables were clean. The chairs were pushed in. Everything was in its place. But the life was gone from the room. It was just a collection of old furniture. Sadie stood in the middle of the empty dining room and listened to the silence. She could hear the hum of the old refrigerator. She could hear the rain tapping on the roof. She felt a deep, hollow ache in her chest. She had grown up in this diner. She had taken her first steps on this checkered floor. She had done her homework in the corner booth. She had shared so many meals with her father at the small table in the kitchen. The diner was not just a building. It was her home. And now it was gone. Her father came out of the kitchen. He had taken off his chef's coat. He was wearing an old, faded sweater. He looked smaller without his uniform. He looked like just an old, sick man. He walked over to Sadie, and put his arm around her. They stood together in the middle of the room for a long time. They did not say anything. There was nothing to say. They just held on to each other. Sadie could feel his body shaking, or maybe it was her own body that was shaking. She did not know. She closed her eyes and tried to memorize everything. The smell of old coffee and fried bacon, the feel of the worn-out vinyl under her fingers, the sight of the red neon sign that spelled out the North Star Diner. She wanted to burn this moment into her memory, even though it hurt. After a while, Arthur let go of her. He walked over to a small, cluttered office in the back. He came back with a small wooden box. It was a simple box made of dark wood. It was not very big. He held it out to Sadie. His hands were trembling again. He told her that everything important was inside it. His voice was a hoarse whisper. He looked so tired. He said he was going upstairs to rest. He climbed the stairs to their small apartment above the diner. Each step seemed to take all of his energy. Sadie watched him go. She stood alone in the dark diner, holding the box. It felt heavy in her hands. She did not open it. She was not ready to see what was inside. She was afraid of what it might mean. The days that followed were the quietest of Sadie's life. The silence of the closed diner was a heavy blanket that smothered everything. She would wake up in her small room, and for a moment, she would forget. She would think she heard the clatter of plates downstairs. She would think she smelled coffee brewing. Then she would remember. The diner was closed. Her father was sick. The world had stopped turning. She would go downstairs and the emptiness would hit her again. Dust motes danced in the pale sunlight that came through the windows. The chairs were stacked on top of the tables. The chrome counter was cold and empty. It looked like a place where something had ended. She spent her days taking care of her father. His illness got worse very quickly. He did not have the strength to leave his bed most days. Sadie would make him soup and tea. She would read to him from old books. He did not talk much. He seemed to be fading away, like an old photograph left in the sun. She would sit by his bed and hold his hand. His hand felt thin and fragile. She would tell him about her day, even though there was nothing to tell. She would talk about the weather. She would talk about the neighbors. She just wanted to fill the silence. She wanted to pretend that everything was normal, but it was not. One afternoon, her father seemed a little better. He was sitting up in his bed. He asked Sadie to open the curtains. He looked out the window at the town below. He told her that he had been happy here. He said that the diner had been a good life. He told her that he was proud of her. He said she was a good artist and a good daughter. His words were a gift, but they were also a goodbye. Sadie felt tears welling up in her eyes. She tried to smile. She told him that she loved him. He smiled back. It was a weak, tired smile, but it was real. He closed his eyes and fell asleep. A few days later, he got much worse. He was having trouble breathing. Sadie had to call for an ambulance. The paramedics came and put him on a stretcher. They carried him down the stairs and out of the diner. Sadie followed them. She watched them put her father into the back of the ambulance. The red lights flashed in the dim evening light. The siren started to wail. The ambulance drove away, leaving her standing alone on the sidewalk. She felt a cold fear grip her heart. She spent the next few days at the hospital. It was a clean, sterile place that smelled of antiseptic. The sounds were all wrong. The beeping of machines, the quiet, hurried footsteps of the nurses, the soft murmur of voices. She sat in a hard plastic chair by her father's bed. He was connected to machines by tubes and wires. He did not open his eyes. Sadie talked to him. She told him stories. She read to him. She played his favorite music softly on her phone. She did not know if he could hear her, but she had to believe he could. She held his hand. She told him not to worry. She told him she would be okay. She did not know if that was true. One evening, a doctor came to talk to her. He was a kind man with a sad face. He told her that her father was not going to get better. He said there was nothing more they could do. He told her to prepare herself. The words were gentle, but they hit her like a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs. She went back to her father's room. The room was quiet except for the steady beep of a machine. She sat down and took his hand. It was cold. She talked to him for hours. She told him all the things she had never said. She thanked him for being a wonderful father. She told him how much she would miss him. She told him it was okay to let go. Later that night, the beeping of the machine changed. It became a long, steady tone. A nurse came in and turned it off. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence that filled the entire universe. Arthur was gone. Sadie sat there for a long time, holding his hand. She did not cry. She felt completely empty, as if someone had scooped out her insides. She was alone. The North Star Diner was gone. Her father was gone. Her world had ended. She was 21 years old, and she was an orphan. The grief was a physical thing. It was a heavy weight on her chest. It was a tight band around her head. It was a cold, empty space in her stomach. She did not know how she would ever be able to stand up and walk out of that room. She did not know how she would be able to face the world without her father. She just sat in the dark, silent room, lost in a sea of sorrow. The long, lonely journey of grief had just begun. Chapter 2: A Box of Ghosts. Sadie stayed in the small apartment above the diner. The world outside kept moving. Cars drove down the main street. People walked on the sidewalks. The sun rose in the morning and set in the evening. But Sadie's world had stopped. Her life was frozen in the moment the machine in the hospital room went silent. She felt like a boat that had been cut loose from its anchor. She was adrift in a quiet, gray sea of nothing. She did not know what to do next. There were no more meals to cook for her father. There were no more customers to serve downstairs. There was no one to talk to. The silence was the loudest thing in her life. It was a physical presence in the apartment. It sat with her at the small kitchen table. It lay next to her in her empty bed. It followed her from room to room. The apartment was small. There was a little kitchen, a tiny living room, and 2 small bedrooms. It was the only home she had ever known. Now it felt like a stranger's house. Everything in it was a reminder of what she had lost. Her father's bedroom door was closed. She did not open it. She could not bring herself to face the empty bed, the clothes still hanging in the closet. The thought of it made her chest feel tight. She slept in her own small room. The bed was next to a window that looked out over the street. She used to like this window. She would watch the town wake up in the morning. Now she just saw a world that was moving on without her. She would lie in bed for hours after she woke up. The sheets would feel cold. The light coming through the window would seem too bright. She had no reason to get up. There was nowhere to go and nothing to do. Her days had no shape. They were just long, empty stretches of time. She did not feel hungry. She would forget to eat for most of the day. Then she would realize her stomach hurt. She would go to the kitchen and eat a piece of toast or a bowl of cereal. The food had no taste. It was just something to make the emptiness in her stomach go away for a little while. Time became a strange thing. The days blended together. Was it Tuesday or was it Wednesday? She did not know. It did not matter. Each day was the same as the one before. It was a long, slow river of sadness. She would sit on the old sofa in the living room. The fabric was worn and faded. It smelled faintly of her father. She would stare at the wall. She would not think about anything. She would just sit there as the light in the room changed. The morning sun would make a bright square on the floor. The afternoon light would be soft and golden. The evening would bring long, dark shadows. Then the room would be black. She would not turn on the lights. She would just sit in the darkness. Sometimes she would cry. The tears would come without warning. They would run down her face, and she would not wipe them away. They were quiet tears. She made no sound. It was just a silent, steady leaking of her grief. Downstairs, the diner was a tomb. It was full of the ghosts of laughter and conversation. Sadie did not go down there often. When she did, the emptiness was overwhelming. The dust was starting to collect on everything. A thin layer of gray covered the counter and the tables. It was like a soft blanket of forgetting. The air was still and smelled of stale coffee and dust. Mail had started to pile up on the floor by the front door. Brown envelopes and colorful flyers. They were messages from a world that she was no longer a part of. She would look at the pile and feel nothing. She would just turn around and go back upstairs to the quiet apartment. She felt disconnected from everything. She was a spectator watching her own life from a great distance. She felt a profound loneliness that was so deep it felt like a part of her body. It was in her bones and in her blood. Many weeks passed in this way. The green leaves on the trees outside her window turned yellow and then brown. They began to fall, spinning slowly to the ground. Autumn was coming. The air grew colder. Sadie put on one of her father's old sweaters. It was big and warm. It smelled like him. Wearing it felt like a small, sad hug. One morning, she woke up, and the feeling in the apartment was different. The silence was still there. The sadness was still there. But there was something else. A small, sharp feeling of impatience. She could not spend another day just sitting. She could not spend another day staring at the wall. The grief was still a heavy weight, but she felt a tiny spark of something new. A need to move, a need to do something, anything. She remembered the box. the small wooden box her father had given her on the last day of the diner. She had put it on a shelf in her room and had not touched it since. It sat there in the corner, covered in a thin layer of dust. She had been afraid to open it. She was afraid of what she might find. She was also afraid of what she might not find. She had a small, secret hope that it contained money. Enough money to fix her problems. Enough money to make the world feel a little less scary. She knew it was a foolish hope, but it was there. She walked over to the shelf and picked up the box. It was cool and smooth in her hands. She ran her fingers over the dark wood. She remembered her father's face when he gave it to her. He had looked so tired. He had told her that everything important was inside. She took the box to the kitchen table. The morning light was streaming through the window. It made the dust in the air sparkle. She sat down and placed the box in front of her. She stared at it for a long time. It was a final connection to her father. Once she opened it, that connection would change. It would become a memory. She took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking. She put her fingers on the lid and slowly, carefully, she lifted it up. The lid made a soft creaking sound. A smell came from the box. It was the smell of old paper and dry wood. It was a smell from the past. She looked inside. Her heart sank a little. There was no money. There were no important papers like a deed to a house or a bank book. The box was full of postcards. They were stacked neatly in bundles. Each bundle was tied together with a piece of rough brown string. Sadie felt a wave of disappointment. Then she felt a wave of curiosity. She lifted one of the bundles out of the box. The string was old and brittle. It broke in her hands. The postcards fell onto the table. They were old. The colors were faded. The edges were soft and worn. She picked one up. On the front was a picture of a tall mountain with snow on its peak. On the back, there was writing. It was her father's handwriting. But it was different from the shaky, weak writing of his last years. This handwriting was strong and bold and full of life. It was the handwriting of a young man. The postcard was addressed to someone named Samuel in Colorado. The message was short. It said, "Reach the top. The world looks so small from up here. Wish you were here." There was no stamp on it. It had never been sent. Sadie picked up another postcard. This one had a picture of a big, busy city with tall buildings. It was for a woman named Maria in Chicago. It said, "This city never sleeps. I think I could get used to that." She picked up another, and then another. There were so many of them. Postcards from all over the country. There were pictures of sunny beaches, dark forests, wide rivers, and empty deserts. Each one had a message. Each one was addressed to a different person, and none of them had been sent. She untied the other bundles. The table was soon covered in postcards. It was a map of a life she knew nothing about. Her father had always been the man in the diner, the man who cooked eggs and burgers, the man who was always there in their small town. She had never thought about his life before the diner. She had never imagined him as a young man who climbed mountains and explored big cities. She began to read them one by one. It felt like she was reading a secret diary. The messages were small windows into her father's past. A postcard from Nashville to a man named David talked about hearing a new kind of music that made him want to dance all night. A postcard from Florida to a woman named Sarah had a funny drawing of a pelican trying to steal a fish. A postcard from Texas to someone named Ben simply said, "Everything really is bigger here, especially the sky." The man who wrote these postcards was a stranger to her. He was adventurous. He was funny. He had so many friends. Where had all these people gone? Why did he never send the postcards? It was a mystery. She spent the whole day reading them. She did not stop to eat. She did not notice when the sun went down and the room grew dark. She just sat at the table with the ghosts of her father's past. These postcards were more than just pieces of paper. They were proof of a life lived, a life that had been full of experiences and connections before it became small and quiet in the diner. She felt a mix of emotions. She was sad that she had never known this side of her father. She was sad that he had lost touch with all these people. She was angry that the diner had taken so much from him. But she also felt a sense of wonder. Her father was more than she had ever known. His world had been so much bigger than she had ever imagined. As she sorted through the stacks of cards, one of them felt different. It was at the bottom of a bundle. The picture on the front was of a rocky coastline. A small lighthouse stood on a cliff, overlooking a dark, churning sea. The sky in the picture was gray and stormy. It was a beautiful and lonely image. She turned it over. It was addressed to a man named Finn in a town called Port Clyde in Maine. The message was longer than the others. Her father had written, "Finn, I still think about that fishing trip. We almost froze, but we caught the biggest fish I have ever seen. I made that clam chowder recipe you gave me. It was good, but not as good as yours. I'm sorry about the argument. I was a fool. I hope the sea is treating you well." Below the message, he had written out the recipe for the clam chowder. The ingredients were simple. The instructions were clear. This postcard was different. It was not just a happy note from a traveler. It was full of regret. It was an apology that had never been delivered. Sadie held the postcard in her hand. She could almost smell the salty air from the picture. She could almost hear the sound of the waves crashing on the rocks. She thought about this man, Finn. Was he still alive? Did he ever think about her father? Did he know that Arthur had been sorry? The thought of this unsaid apology made her own grief feel sharper. There were so many things she wished she had said to her father before he died. So many questions she wished she had asked. A new idea began to form in her mind. It was a small, quiet idea at first. It felt crazy and impossible, but it would not go away. What if she delivered the postcards? What if she found these people and gave them her father's words? It was a wild thought. She had no money. She had never traveled alone. She did not even know if these people still lived at the same addresses. But the idea grew stronger. It felt like a purpose. It was a way to connect with the father she had never known. It was a way to honor his memory. But it was also something more. It was a way to escape. It was a way to leave the silent apartment and the sad, empty town. It was a way to start moving again. The grief was a heavy anchor holding her in place. This journey could be the thing that set her free. She looked at the postcard to Finn. Port Clyde, Maine. It seemed like the other side of the world. She had no idea how she would get there. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of something that was not sadness. It was a tiny spark of determination. She would do it. She would take this box of ghosts and she would give them a voice. She would finish the journey that her father had started all those years ago. She gathered all the postcards and put them back into the wooden box. She held the box close to her chest. It no longer felt like a box of sad memories. It felt like a map. It was her father's last gift to her. It was a map that would lead her out of the darkness and into a new life. The decision was made. She did not know where the road would take her. She did not know what she would find, but she knew she had to go. Her long walk was about to begin. Chapter 3: The Salty Air of Port Clyde. The decision to leave felt like the first real choice Sadie had made in a long time. It was a single point of light in a vast darkness of grief. But a decision was not enough. She had no money. The small amount of cash in her father's wallet was almost gone. The apartment and the diner belonged to the bank now. She had nothing, except the diner itself. It was empty of life, but it was full of things. Heavy, metal things. Things her father had used every single day. The idea of selling them felt like a betrayal. Each pan, each knife, each plate held a memory. But memories could not buy a bus ticket. She had to let go of the past to have a future. She found the phone book and looked for restaurant supply companies. She called a man who had a gruff voice. He said he would come the next day to look. The man arrived in a large, loud truck. He was a big man with a thick mustache. He walked through the empty diner with a clipboard. He did not see the memories. He saw old equipment. He tapped on the stainless steel counter. He opened and closed the oven doors. He looked at the big, heavy mixer that Sadie's father had used to make pancake batter every morning. Sadie remembered being a little girl, standing on a stool to watch the batter swirl around in the big metal bowl. The man made a note on his clipboard. He offered her a small amount of money. It was much less than she had hoped for, but she had no other choice. She said yes. The next day, he came back with 2 other men. They began to empty the kitchen. The sounds of metal scraping on the floor echoed in the empty building. It was a loud, ugly sound. Sadie stayed upstairs in the apartment. She did not want to watch. She closed her door and covered her ears, but she could still hear it. It was the sound of her childhood being dismantled and carried away. When the noise finally stopped, she went downstairs. The kitchen was completely bare. The places where the stove and the grill had been were now just pale squares on the floor. The room felt huge and wrong. It was a hollowed-out shell. The ghost of the kitchen was gone. All that was left was a cold, empty room. The man gave her an envelope with cash inside. The money felt dirty in her hands. She took it and went back upstairs. She did not count it. She just put the envelope on the table. It was the price of her past. It was the price of her freedom. The finality of it was a new kind of pain. It was sharp and clean. It was the pain of a necessary cut. The diner was truly gone now. There was nothing left to hold on to. There was only the road ahead. Now she could prepare. Her preparation was simple. She had one backpack. It was an old one she had used for school. She laid it on her bed. She had to choose carefully what to take. She could not take much. She packed 2 pairs of jeans, a few shirts, and some socks. She packed a warm sweater. She chose her father's old sweater, the one she had been wearing for weeks. It still smelled a little like him. It was a comfort she could not leave behind. She packed her toothbrush and a bar of soap. She looked around her small room. There were books and old drawings. There were small things that had been part of her life. She could not take any of them. She was leaving everything behind. She was becoming a person with only one bag. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. Then she packed the 2 most important things. She took her sketchbook and a few pencils. The sketchbook was almost empty. The clean white pages were a promise of new things to see. She put it carefully in the bag where it would not get bent. And last, she packed the wooden box. It was the heaviest thing she owned, not because of its weight, but because of what it held. It held her father's past. It held her future. It was the reason for this whole journey. She wrapped the box in a soft towel and placed it at the very bottom of her backpack. It felt like she was carrying a collection of fragile hearts. She zipped up the bag. That was it. Her entire life was now contained in one small backpack. She put on her coat and her old, comfortable walking shoes. She took the envelope of money from the table. She did not look around the apartment. She did not say goodbye to the empty rooms. She just walked out the door and locked it behind her. She left the key on the counter of the empty diner. She walked away and did not look back. The bus station was a small, sad building on the edge of town. It smelled of exhaust fumes and stale cigarette smoke. A few tired-looking people sat on the hard plastic chairs. Sadie went to the ticket counter. She told the woman behind the glass that she wanted a ticket to Maine. The woman asked her where in Maine. Sadie looked at the postcard in her hand. The picture of the lighthouse seemed to mock her. She said, "Port Clyde." The woman typed on her computer. She said there was no bus to Port Clyde. The bus only went to a bigger town nearby. From there, Sadie would have to find another way. Sadie said that was fine. The ticket was expensive. It took most of the money she had. The woman printed the ticket and pushed it under the glass. It was a long piece of paper with many names of cities and towns on it. It was a map of the next few days of her life. The bus ride was a long, blurry dream. The world she knew disappeared behind her. The bus traveled through small towns that looked like her own. It traveled through big cities with buildings that scraped the sky. It traveled through wide, open country with fields that stretched on forever. Sadie sat by the window and watched it all go by. She did not feel like she was part of it. She felt like she was watching a movie. The other passengers were strangers. They got on the bus and got off the bus. They talked on their phones or slept with their heads against the window. Sadie did not talk to anyone. She was a silent observer. She was a girl in a bubble of grief, moving through a world that did not know she existed. The bus was a world of its own. It had its own sounds and smells. The steady roar of the engine, the hiss of the air brakes, the smell of cheap air freshener and fast food. During the day, she watched the landscape change. The flat fields of the Midwest turned into the rolling hills of the East. The trees grew taller and thicker. The houses looked older. At night, the bus was dark and quiet. The only light came from the small reading lights above the seats and the distant glow of cities they passed. Sadie could not sleep much. She would lean her head against the cold glass of the window and watch the dark shapes of trees and houses rush by. The loneliness was a heavy presence beside her. It was as real as another passenger. She thought about her father. She wondered if he had taken a bus like this one. She wondered if he had felt this same mix of fear and excitement. She held her backpack on her lap. She could feel the hard corners of the wooden box pressing against her. It was a reminder of her purpose. It kept the fear from swallowing her whole. The bus stopped at stations in the middle of the night. The bright, ugly lights of the stations were a shock after the darkness of the highway. People would get off to smoke a cigarette or buy a snack from a machine. The air outside would be cold and damp. Sadie would get off just to stretch her legs. She would stand on the pavement and look up at the stars. The stars were the only familiar thing. They were the same stars she could see from her bedroom window back home. It made her feel a little less alone. It made her feel like maybe her father was watching over her. She would get back on the bus, and the journey would continue. She was traveling further and further from her old life with every mile. The sadness was still with her. It was a constant, dull ache in her chest. But now there was something else too, a thin thread of hope. She was moving toward something. She did not know what it was, but it was better than staying still. After 3 long days, the bus finally arrived in Maine. The air that came through the open door of the bus was different. It was cool and damp, and it smelled of salt. Sadie got off the bus. She was in a small city. It was not Port Clyde. She had to find another bus, a smaller one that went to the small coastal towns. She found a local bus schedule. She had to wait for 2 hours. She sat on a bench and watched the people. They walked with a purpose. They seemed to know where they were going. Sadie felt like she had landed on another planet. The way people talked was different. Their accents were sharp and quick. Everything was new and strange. The smaller bus took her along the coast. The road was narrow and winding. On one side were thick, dark green forests. On the other side was the sea. It was the first time Sadie had ever seen the ocean. It was bigger than she had ever imagined. It was a vast expanse of gray water that stretched all the way to the horizon. The sky was gray too. It was hard to tell where the water ended and the sky began. White waves crashed against a rocky shore. The sight of it was beautiful and a little bit scary. It was so powerful and wild. It made her feel very small. She pressed her face against the window, trying to take it all in. The bus stopped in Port Clyde. Sadie was the only one who got off. The bus drove away, leaving her standing by the side of the road. The town was small. It was just a cluster of old wooden buildings around a small harbor. The harbor was full of fishing boats. The boats were old and sturdy. They were painted bright colors, but the paint was peeling and faded. The air was thick with the smell of salt and fish. It was a strong, powerful smell that was everywhere. Seagulls cried out from the rooftops. They were loud and demanding. The whole town felt weathered and tough, as if it had been worn down by the wind and the sea. It was nothing like her quiet, inland hometown. This place had a raw energy that was both exciting and intimidating. Sadie did not know where to go. She held the postcard in her hand. The address was just a name, Finn, and the name of the town. There was no street address. She knew she would have to ask for help. She walked toward a small building that had a sign that said, General Store. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. A little bell jingled above her head. The inside of the store was dark and crowded. The shelves were packed with cans of food, coils of rope, and fishing supplies. An old man with a long white beard stood behind the counter. He looked at Sadie with suspicious eyes. She was clearly a stranger. She was not dressed like the people here. Her clothes were too clean. Her face was not weathered by the sun and the salt air. She walked up to the counter. She asked the man if he knew someone named Finn. The man just stared at her. He did not say anything for a long moment. He just chewed on a toothpick. Finally, he said, "Maybe. Who's asking?" His voice was rough, like gravel. Sadie explained that she was a friend of his. A friend of a friend. She told him she had a message for him. The man just grunted. He did not seem to believe her. He told her that a lot of people in this town were named Finn. He asked which one she was looking for. Sadie did not know. She just knew he was a fisherman. The man laughed. He said everyone in this town was a fisherman. He was not being helpful. Sadie felt her face get hot. She felt like an idiot. She thanked the man and left the store. She walked down to the harbor. The fishing boats were tied to the docks. Men in heavy boots and thick sweaters were working on the boats. They were mending nets and cleaning their gear. They were a rough-looking group of men. Their faces were red and chapped from the wind. Their hands were thick and calloused. They all seemed to be talking and laughing. But when Sadie walked by, they grew quiet. They would stop what they were doing and watch her. Their stares were not friendly. They were curious, but also suspicious. She felt like an intruder. She tried to ask one of the men about Finn. He just shook his head and turned his back to her. She tried another man. He just spit on the ground near her feet and walked away. The people of this town were like a closed circle. They did not welcome strangers. Sadie started to feel a sense of despair. Maybe this was a stupid idea. Maybe she should just get back on the bus and go home. But she had no home to go back to. She sat on a wooden bench overlooking the water. The gray sky was starting to get dark. A cold wind blew in from the sea. She pulled her father's sweater tighter around her. She felt very alone. She was about to give up when she saw an old woman walking toward her. The woman was carrying a basket of laundry. She had a kind, wrinkled face. She smiled at Sadie. The smile was like a small ray of sunshine on a cloudy day. The woman asked her if she was lost. Sadie told her she was looking for a man named Finn. The woman asked what he looked like. Sadie said she did not know. She only knew that he was a friend of her father, Arthur. She told the woman her father's name. The woman's eyes widened a little. She said she remembered a man named Arthur from a long time ago. a man from away who loved to fish. Sadie's heart started to beat faster. She said yes, that was him. The woman pointed to a small, weathered cottage at the very end of the point. It was set apart from the other houses. She said that was where old Finn lived. She told Sadie to be careful. She said he was a quiet man. He did not like company. Sadie thanked the woman. She felt a new surge of energy. She walked toward the cottage. It was a long walk along a narrow dirt path. The cottage was small. The wooden shingles were gray and worn by the sea salt. A pile of old lobster traps sat by the side of the house. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. It looked like a lonely place. Sadie's heart was pounding in her chest. She was nervous. What would she say to this man? What if he did not want to see her? She walked up to the front door. There was no doorbell. She lifted her hand and knocked. The sound was loud in the quiet air. She waited. There was no answer. She knocked again, louder this time. She heard a sound from inside. The sound of a chair scraping on a wooden floor. The door opened a small crack. A man's face appeared in the opening. He was an old man. His face was a map of wrinkles. His eyes were a pale, watery blue, the color of the sea on a winter day. They were wary and untrusting. He had a thick, white beard. He looked at Sadie without saying a word. He was not happy to have a visitor. Sadie's voice was a small, shaky thing. She said his name, Finn. The man just stared at her. He did not confirm or deny it. Sadie held out the postcard. Her hand was trembling. She told him that her father had written it for him a long time ago. She told him her father's name was Arthur. The man's expression did not change. He just looked from her face to the postcard. He slowly reached out a hand. His hand was rough and gnarled, like a piece of old driftwood. He took the postcard from her. He held it for a moment, as if weighing it. Then he closed the door in her face. Sadie stood on the doorstep, stunned. She felt a wave of crushing disappointment. That was it. He had taken the card and closed the door. She had come all this way for nothing. She turned to leave. She had taken a few steps back down the path when she heard the door open again. She turned around. Finn was standing in the doorway. He was holding the postcard. He had read it. His face was different. The hard, suspicious look was gone. His pale blue eyes were full of a deep, ancient sadness. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper. He looked at Sadie. He said one word. "Come." His voice was low and raspy, like the sound of stones tumbling in the surf. Sadie followed him into the small cottage. The inside was simple and clean. There was one room. A small bed was in one corner. A simple wooden table and 2 chairs were in the center. A stone fireplace took up one wall. A small fire was burning, casting a warm, flickering light on the room. The room smelled of wood smoke and the sea. Finn sat down at the table. He motioned for Sadie to sit in the other chair. She sat down. He placed the postcard on the table between them. He stared at it for a long time. The silence in the room was heavy, but it was not an angry silence. It was a sad, thoughtful silence. Finally, he spoke. He told her that he and Arthur had been good friends. They had met when Arthur had come to this town on a vacation many years ago. They both loved to fish. They spent a lot of time on the water together. Then he told her about the argument. It was a stupid thing, an argument about a woman. He could not even remember her face now. But their pride had been too strong. They had said things they did not mean. Arthur left, and they never spoke again. Finn looked up from the postcard. He looked at Sadie. He said he was sorry to hear that Arthur was gone. He could see the grief in her eyes. He knew what it looked like. He told her that the sea had taken his wife and his son many years ago. He understood what it meant to be alone. He saw that Sadie was tired. She had been traveling for a long time. He told her she could stay here for a few days. There was a small loft above the main room where she could sleep. Sadie did not know what to say. She was so grateful she could have cried. She just nodded. The next few days were quiet. Finn did not talk much. He was not a man of many words, but his presence was a comfort. He showed her how to make a fire in the fireplace. He made her a simple dinner of fish and potatoes. It was the best meal she had had in months. He showed her the loft where she would sleep. It was a small space with a simple mattress on the floor and a pile of warm blankets. There was a small window that looked out over the sea. That night, Sadie fell asleep to the sound of the waves crashing on the shore. It was a steady, rhythmic sound. It was the sound of the world breathing. For the first time since her father died, she slept through the whole night. In the morning, Finn took her down to the docks. He was mending his fishing nets. He showed her how to do it. His big, rough hands moved with a surprising grace. He showed her how to tie the special knots. He gave her a needle and some twine and let her help. The work was slow and repetitive. It required focus. Sadie's mind, which had been a chaotic storm of sad thoughts for so long, grew quiet. She focused on the simple task in front of her. The feel of the rough twine in her fingers, the in and out motion of the needle. They worked for hours without talking. The only sounds were the cries of the seagulls and the gentle lapping of the water against the boats. As they worked, Finn would sometimes point out to the sea. He would tell her about the tides. He would tell her how the color of the water could predict the weather. He spoke about the ocean with a deep respect. He told her, "The sea takes things away, but it also gives things back." Sadie thought about her father. The sea had not taken him, but life had. And now, this journey, this sea, was giving her something back. It was giving her a small piece of peace. In the afternoons, Sadie would walk along the rocky beach. She would collect smooth gray stones and interesting pieces of driftwood. She started to use her sketchbook. At first, she just drew the shapes of the rocks and the shells. Then she started to draw the fishing boats in the harbor. They were complicated subjects with all their ropes and nets. She liked the challenge. She liked getting lost in the details. One afternoon, she sat on the dock and drew a picture of Finn's face as he worked on his nets. He had a powerful, interesting face. It was a face that had seen a lot of storms, both on the sea and in life. He pretended not to notice she was drawing him, but he sat a little straighter. He did not move his head as much. When she was finished, she showed it to him. He looked at it for a long time. He did not say if it was good or bad. He just grunted and nodded. But she saw a small, sad smile in his eyes. Sadie stayed with Finn for a week. In that week, something inside her began to shift. The heavy, crushing weight of her grief was still there. But it was not so heavy anymore. It was something she could carry. The quiet company of the old fisherman and the powerful presence of the sea had started to heal her in a way she did not understand. She felt a quiet strength growing inside of her. She knew she could not stay here forever. Her journey was not over. There were more postcards in the box. One morning, she told Finn that it was time for her to leave. He just nodded. He seemed to have known it was coming. He did not ask her to stay. He understood that she had her own path to walk. He walked with her to the spot where the bus would stop. They waited in silence. When the bus came, Sadie turned to him. She thanked him for everything, for his kindness, for sharing his home with her. He just put a rough hand on her shoulder and gave it a small squeeze. It was his way of saying goodbye. Sadie got on the bus. She found a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away, she looked back. Finn was still standing there, watching her go. He was a small, lonely figure against the vast gray sea. But he did not look weak. He looked strong and solid, like the rocks on the shore. Sadie felt tears in her eyes, but they were not just sad tears. They were also tears of gratitude. The first stop on her journey was over. It had been harder than she had expected, and it had been more wonderful than she could have hoped. She opened her backpack and took out the wooden box. She chose the next postcard. A new city, a new name. She was ready. The long walk continued. Chapter 4: The Rhythm of New Orleans. The bus carried Sadie away from the gray coast of Maine. She watched through the window as the landscape slowly began to change. The dark, pointed fir trees began to mix with other kinds of trees. Trees with wide, open leaves that were turning brilliant shades of yellow and red. The bus moved south, always south. The journey was another long, slow dream. The quiet solitude of Finn's cottage was replaced by the constant, low roar of the bus engine. The world outside the window was a painting that was always changing. The rocky hills of New England flattened into wide coastal plains. The air, even through the filtered vents of the bus, started to lose its sharp, cold edge. It began to feel softer, thicker. Sadie kept the postcard for New Orleans in her pocket. She would take it out and look at it. The picture showed a balcony made of black, curling iron. It looked like a delicate piece of lace made of metal. Green vines with bright pink flowers were wrapped around the railings. The message on the back was so different from the one to Finn. It was full of life and energy. Her father had written, "Juliet, the music here gets into your bones. I learned to dance. We should eat beignets until the sun comes up." He had drawn a small, funny picture of a trumpet next to his words. This was a man Sadie did not know at all. The bus pulled into the station in New Orleans late in the afternoon. When the doors opened, the air that flowed in was a shock. It was not just warm, it was heavy. It was a thick, wet heat that you could feel on your skin. It was like walking into a greenhouse. The air smelled of things Sadie had never smelled before. There was the sweet, heavy scent of flowers. There was the smell of damp earth and river water. There was the delicious smell of food cooking with spices she did not recognize. And underneath it all, there was a constant hum of sound. Not the quiet sounds of a small town. This was a deep, complicated sound. It was the sound of distant music, the clang of a streetcar bell, the loud laughter of people on the street, and the constant murmur of 1,000 conversations. Sadie stepped off the bus and felt completely overwhelmed. The city was a living thing. It was breathing and moving all around her. It was so much bigger and louder and more alive than she could have ever imagined. Port Clyde had been quiet and full of empty spaces. This place was full of color and noise and people. She felt very small and very alone. Her backpack with the wooden box inside suddenly felt very heavy. She found a cheap guest house a few blocks away from the main tourist area. It was an old building, painted a pale yellow color. A long, narrow balcony ran along the second floor. It looked just like the balcony on the postcard. Her room was small and simple. It had a tall ceiling and a slow-moving fan that stirred the thick air. The window looked out onto a small, hidden courtyard. The courtyard was filled with big, leafy plants and a small, cracked fountain where a few pigeons were drinking water. It was a little pocket of quiet in the middle of the loud city. But even here she could hear the music. It was a faint sound, a saxophone playing a slow, sad song somewhere far away. The sound made her feel even more lonely. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the postcard again. She only had a name, Juliet. A musician in a city full of musicians. Finding her felt like an impossible task. The fear she had felt when she first left home came back. It was a cold, tight knot in her stomach. But then she thought of Finn. She thought of his quiet strength. She had found him. She could find Juliet, too. The next day, she began her search. She walked to the part of the city called the French Quarter. The buildings were old and beautiful. They were painted in bright, cheerful colors, pink and blue and yellow and green. They had tall, narrow windows and wooden shutters, and almost every building had a balcony with the same beautiful, black iron railings. It was a city of balconies. The streets were narrow and crowded. People were everywhere. Tourists with cameras, street performers playing music or pretending to be statues, artists selling paintings on the sidewalk. The air was full of the smell of sweet, sugary pastries and strong, dark coffee. Sadie walked for hours. She looked at every building. She listened to every piece of music. She felt like she was in a dream. It was all so beautiful and strange. She would ask people for help. She would show them the postcard and ask if they knew a musician named Juliet. The people here were much friendlier than in Port Clyde. They would smile and try to help, but no one knew her. They would tell her to check the music clubs on Bourbon Street. They would tell her to just listen for the sound of a clarinet. That night, she walked down Bourbon Street. It was a street of pure chaos. It was packed with people. Bright neon signs flashed everywhere. Loud music spilled out from the open doors of dozens of clubs. It was a river of noise and light. Sadie felt a wall of sound hit her. It was too much. She could not tell one song from another. It was just a loud, messy jumble of noise. This did not feel like the right place. The music her father had written about felt different. It felt more special. She left the chaos of Bourbon Street and started to walk down the quieter side streets. Here, the music was different. It was softer, more soulful. She found small, dark clubs tucked away in old buildings. She would stand outside and listen. She heard amazing piano players. She heard singers with voices that could break your heart. She heard small bands that played music that was both happy and sad at the same time. This felt closer. For several days, her life fell into a rhythm. During the day, she would explore the city. She would walk through the beautiful garden district and look at the huge old houses that sat behind iron fences. She would walk through the old cemeteries where the graves were in stone boxes above the ground. She found it strange and beautiful. She would sit by the side of the big brown Mississippi River and watch the huge steamboats go by. She started to fill her sketchbook. She drew the iron balconies. She drew the twisted branches of the old oak trees. She drew the faces of the people she saw. Her hand moved with a new confidence. The city was so full of life and character, it made her want to draw everything. In the evenings, she would search for Juliet. She would go from one small club to another. She would ask the bartenders. She would ask the other musicians. A few people had heard the name. They said Juliet was a legend, a clarinet player with a sound like no one else. But no one knew where she was playing now. They said she did not play in the tourist spots anymore. She played in the places where the real music lovers went. One night, a friendly bartender in a smoky little club gave her a real lead. He told her that a musician like Juliet would probably play in the Marigny, a neighborhood just outside the French Quarter. He told her to look for a small club with a red door. He said it did not even have a sign. You just had to know it was there. The next night, Sadie walked to the Marigny. The streets were darker here. The houses were smaller. It felt more like a real neighborhood, not a place for tourists. And then she saw it. A small, old building with a single red door. There was no sign. The only light came from a single lantern hanging above the door. She could hear music coming from inside. It was the sound of a clarinet. It was a clear, beautiful sound. It was playing a melody that was so full of joy, it made you want to cry. Sadie's heart started to beat fast. She felt like she was in the right place. She pushed open the red door and stepped inside. The club was small and dark. The air was thick with smoke. The room was packed with people, but everyone was completely silent. They were all listening to the music. A small band was playing on a tiny stage in the corner. There was a piano player, a bass player, and a drummer. And in the center, there was a woman playing the clarinet. She was not a young woman. Her hair was a wild cloud of gray and black curls. She wore a simple black dress and a string of colorful beads. Her eyes were closed as she played. Her whole body moved with the music. The sounds coming from her clarinet were not just notes. They were feelings. The music was a story. It told a story of happiness and loss, of love and of pain. It was the most beautiful music Sadie had ever heard. Sadie knew without a doubt that this was Juliet. She stood by the door and listened. She was completely captivated. She felt a strange connection to this woman and her music. It felt like she was hearing a part of her father's soul. When the song ended, the small room erupted in applause. People were whistling and cheering. Juliet opened her eyes. She had a wide, generous smile. Her eyes were dark and full of life. She looked out at the crowd and bowed. She looked tired, but very happy. Sadie waited until the band had finished their set. She waited until most of the people had left the club. Her hands were sweating. She was so nervous. She walked up to the small stage. Juliet was packing her clarinet into a black case. Sadie said her name. "Juliet?" The woman looked up. Her smile was warm. She asked if she had enjoyed the music. Sadie said it was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. Then she reached into her bag and took out the postcard. She told Juliet that her father had written it for her a very long time ago. She told her his name was Arthur. Juliet took the postcard. She looked at the picture of the balcony. Then she turned it over and looked at the handwriting. Her smile slowly faded. Her eyes filled with a look of shock and then a deep, powerful wave of memory. She traced the letters of her father's name with her finger. She read his words about the music and the beignets. A single tear ran down her cheek. Then she started to laugh. It was not a happy laugh. It was a laugh that was full of sadness and surprise and a little bit of anger. It was the laugh of someone who had just been visited by a ghost. She looked at Sadie. She said, "Arthur, I have not heard that name in 30 years. I thought he had forgotten all about me." Sadie just stood there. She did not know what to say. Juliet wiped the tear from her cheek. She looked at Sadie with new eyes. She saw the sadness in Sadie's face. She asked where Arthur was now. Sadie's voice was quiet. She told her that he had passed away a few months ago. Juliet's face softened. All the anger and surprise was gone. Now there was only a deep, gentle sadness. She reached out and took Sadie's hand. Her hand was warm and strong. She told Sadie she was so sorry. She looked at the postcard again. She said, "That man, he could always make me laugh, and he could always make me cry." She told Sadie to sit down. She pulled up 2 chairs. The club was empty now except for them and the bartender who was quietly cleaning glasses at the other end of the room. Juliet started to talk. She told Sadie about her father, but the man she described was a complete stranger to Sadie. The Arthur that Juliet knew was not a tired, quiet man who worked in a diner. He was a young man with a wild heart. He had come to New Orleans with a backpack and a sense of adventure. He did not have much money, but he had a huge appetite for life. Juliet said he fell in love with the city. He fell in love with the food. He fell in love with the music. She laughed as she told a story about trying to teach him how to dance. She said he had 2 left feet, but he tried so hard. He would practice for hours. He just wanted to be a part of the city's rhythm. She said he would stay out all night, going from club to club, just listening to the music. He would sit in the back of the room with a look of pure joy on his face. He did not just hear the music, he felt it. She said he was one of the few people who really understood what the music was about. It was about telling the truth about life, the happy parts and the sad parts. He understood that. The stories poured out of her. They were vivid and full of life. She painted a picture of a man that Sadie had never even imagined. A man who was full of passion and laughter and a deep love for the world. This new image of her father did not replace the man she had known and loved. It just made the picture bigger and more complete. It filled in the empty spaces she had never known were there. When Juliet finished her stories, the club was dark and silent. The bartender had gone home. It was just the two of them. Juliet looked at Sadie. She saw how lost the young woman was. She told Sadie that she could not stay in the guest house. She told her to come and stay with her. Sadie tried to say no, but Juliet would not listen. She said that any daughter of Arthur was a friend of hers. She packed up her clarinet. She put her arm around Sadie's shoulder and led her out of the little club with the red door. They walked through the quiet, moonlit streets of the Marigny to Juliet's apartment. Juliet's apartment was not like Finn's quiet, simple cottage. It was a wonderful, chaotic mess. It was a large, open room with high ceilings. The walls were painted a deep blue color. There were instruments everywhere. A big old piano stood in one corner. A collection of guitars hung on one wall. There were drums and trumpets and saxophones. The room was filled with the tools of her life. There were stacks of books and piles of sheet music. Colorful scarves were draped over every chair. The room was also full of plants, big, leafy plants in colorful pots. It looked like a jungle. The whole place was overflowing with life and color and creativity. It was a perfect reflection of the woman who lived there. Juliet made a bed for Sadie on a comfortable old sofa. She gave her a soft, handmade quilt. Sadie fell asleep that night, surrounded by the quiet presence of all that music. She felt safe. The next few days, Sadie became part of Juliet's world. It was a world built on community. Juliet's friends were always stopping by the apartment. They were other musicians and artists and writers. They would bring food to share. They would sit around the big kitchen table and talk and laugh for hours. They would pick up instruments and start to play music. The apartment was always full of sound, the sound of conversation and laughter and beautiful, improvised music. Sadie had never experienced anything like it. She had always felt like an outsider. Here, in this messy, music-filled apartment, she felt like she belonged. These people did not have a lot of money. They lived simple lives. But their lives were so rich. They were rich in friendship and art and passion. Sadie learned from them that a person's worth was not measured by what they owned. It was measured by the joy they created and the love they shared. Inspired by the vibrant life all around her, Sadie started to draw with a new passion. She filled page after page of her sketchbook. She drew Juliet playing her clarinet, her face full of emotion. She drew the old piano player with his long, graceful fingers. She drew the young trumpet player with his cheeks puffed out. She did not just draw what they looked like. She tried to draw what the music felt like. Her drawings became more alive, more full of movement and feeling. She was not just an artist who waited on tables anymore. She was an artist. She felt that truth in her bones. She was finding a part of herself that had been asleep for a long time. One afternoon, Juliet took Sadie to a part of the city she had not seen before. They went to a small, dark shop that was filled with strange and wonderful things. It smelled of incense and old books. An old woman with kind, knowing eyes sat at a small table in the back. She was a fortune teller. Juliet told Sadie to sit down. The old woman took Sadie's hand. Her hand was soft and dry. She looked into Sadie's palm. Then she looked into Sadie's eyes. She did not say much, but her words were heavy with meaning. She told Sadie that she was on the right path. She said, "You think you are carrying messages for the dead, but the dead are fine. The messages are for the living. The most important message is for you." Then she said something that Sadie would not understand until much later. She said, "The hardest part of a long walk is not the first step. It is the moment you learn to walk in your own rhythm." A few days later, Juliet had an idea. She told Sadie that they should not be sad for Arthur. They should celebrate him. The man she knew would not want a quiet, sad funeral. He would want a party. He would want music and dancing. She said they would have a second line for him. She explained that it was a tradition in New Orleans. When someone died, you did not just cry. You celebrated their life. You filled the streets with music and you danced to remember them. The next day, Juliet's friends gathered in a small park. A brass band was there. They had trumpets and trombones and a big bass drum. They started to play. It was not sad music. It was loud and joyful and full of life. It was a powerful, defiant sound. It was a sound that said that even in the face of death, life and joy would go on. They started to walk. It was not a parade. It was a beautiful, chaotic river of people and music. They did not walk in a straight line. They danced and strutted and spun around. Juliet played her clarinet. Her friends played their instruments. People from the neighborhood came out of their houses and joined in. The group grew bigger and bigger. It was a celebration of a man that none of these people had ever met, but they were celebrating for Sadie. They were celebrating the love she had for her father. Sadie walked in the middle of it all. At first, she felt strange. It was so different from the quiet sadness she was used to. But then the music started to get inside her. The rhythm of the big drum was like a heartbeat. The sound of the trumpets was like a joyful shout. She looked at the faces of the people around her. They were all smiling. They were all dancing. A huge wave of emotion washed over her, and she started to cry. But these were not the silent, lonely tears she had cried in her empty apartment. These were big, hot, messy tears. They were tears of grief for the father she had lost. But they were also tears of joy for the father she had just found. The vibrant, laughing, dancing man from Juliet's stories. She cried for all the years she had not known him. She cried for the hard life he had lived. And she cried because, in this strange and wonderful city, surrounded by the kindness of strangers, she finally felt like it was okay to let go. She let the music wash over her. She let the tears fall. She was not just mourning, she was celebrating. It was a beautiful, painful, and perfect goodbye. And in that moment, in the middle of that joyful, noisy street, She felt a sense of peace that she had not felt in a very long time. She was still sad, but she was not lost anymore. She was starting to find her own rhythm. Chapter 5. The Silence of the Desert. The journey from New Orleans to Arizona was a journey from one world to another. Leaving the city felt like waking from a loud, colorful dream. The bus rolled away from the lush greenness, the heavy, wet air, and the constant thrum of music. Sadie sat by the window and watched the world outside slowly shed its skin. The dense forests of Louisiana and East Texas, with their thick undergrowth and trees draped in moss, began to thin out. The ground became drier. The green color of the landscape faded into a pale yellow, then a dusty brown. The sky, which had been a soft, hazy blue in the south, became a hard, bright, endless sheet of blue. It was a bigger sky than she had ever seen before. It made the bus feel like a tiny insect crawling across a huge, empty floor. The bus was no longer a place of quiet observation for her. It was a noisy, moving box. After the deep connections she had made in New Orleans, the anonymous company of strangers felt lonely again. She missed the easy laughter of Juliet's friends. She missed the sound of the clarinet filling a warm, dark room. She retreated into herself. She would look at the postcard for Arizona. The picture showed a vast, empty landscape of red rocks and pale sand under a brilliant blue sky. The message was the shortest of all. It was to a man named Elias. Saw the stars fall. The sky here is a different kind of ocean. There was no apology, no shared recipe. It was a simple statement of wonder, a moment of awe shared between two friends. Sadie got off the bus in a small town that was nothing more than a few dusty streets under the baking sun. The heat was a physical blow. It was not the wet, heavy heat of New Orleans. This was a dry, clean heat that felt like it was pulling all the moisture out of her body. The air was so dry, it hurt to breathe. The light was so bright, it made her squint. Everything was sharp and clear. There were no soft edges here. The buildings were low and simple, made of adobe or wood that had been bleached pale by the sun. The mountains in the distance were not green and rolling. They were jagged peaks of bare rock, colored in shades of red and brown and purple. The silence was the most powerful thing. After the constant noise of New Orleans, the quiet here was deafening. There were no streetcars, no music, no loud crowds. The only sounds were the whisper of the hot wind and the distant cry of a bird. The town felt slow and sleepy, as if the heat had put a spell on it. People moved slowly. They spoke in low voices. It was a place where nothing seemed to happen in a hurry. Sadie began her search for Elias. The postcard said he was a park ranger, but the message was old. She did not know if he still had that job. She went to the small visitor center for the nearby desert park. The woman behind the counter was friendly, but did not know the name. She said many rangers had come and gone over the years. Sadie walked through the small town. She asked in the one grocery store. She asked in the gas station. No one seemed to know him. The people here were not unfriendly like in Port Clyde. They were just quiet and reserved. They would listen to her question, think for a long moment, and then slowly shake their heads. They did not seem very interested in a stranger or her questions. The town was small, but it felt like everyone lived in their own separate world. The houses had small walled-in yards. People did not sit on their front porches. They stayed inside, away from the sun. The sense of community that had been so strong in New Orleans was completely absent here. Here, people seemed to value their privacy and their solitude. Sadie started to feel a familiar sense of hopelessness. Maybe this stop was a dead end. Maybe Elias had moved away years ago. She spent 2 days just walking, asking, and getting nowhere. She was running out of money again. She bought cheap food from the grocery store, bread and cheese and apples. She would eat her meals, sitting on a bench in the small, dusty town square. She felt very visible and very alone. On the third day, she was sitting on that bench, feeling defeated. She was looking at the postcard, wondering what to do next. An old man who was sweeping the sidewalk nearby stopped his work. He was a Native American man with a deeply wrinkled face and long gray hair tied in a braid. He had been watching her for a few days. He walked over to her slowly. He did not say anything. He just looked at the postcard in her hand. Then he looked at her. He asked her, in a very quiet voice, why she was looking for the ranger. Sadie explained her story. She told him about her father and the box of postcards. The old man listened patiently. He did not interrupt. When she was finished, he nodded slowly. He said that Elias did not work as a ranger anymore. He had retired many years ago. He said that Elias lived alone, outside of town. He pointed toward the mountains. He said Elias had a small cabin out in the desert. He did not like visitors. The old man gave her simple directions. Follow the main road out of town. Look for a smaller dirt road that was marked by a pile of white stones. Follow that road until it ends. Then he went back to his sweeping. Sadie felt a surge of hope. She bought 2 large bottles of water. The old man had warned her to take water. She started to walk. The road out of town had no sidewalks. She walked on the sandy shoulder. The sun was relentless. The heat radiated up from the black pavement. Cars would pass her occasionally, sending up clouds of dust. She felt small and exposed in the huge open landscape. After an hour of walking, she found the dirt road. A small pile of white stones was stacked neatly at the entrance. It was barely a road at all. It was just 2 tire tracks in the sand. She turned and started to follow it. The desert stretched out in all directions. It was not empty like she had first thought. It was full of strange and beautiful plants. There were tall green cacti that looked like they were waving at her. There were small spiky bushes and tiny tough flowers that grew close to the ground. The colors were subtle, pale greens and grays and dusty browns. It was a quiet kind of beauty. The walk was long and hard. The sun beat down on her head. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the crunch of her own footsteps in the sand. She started to feel a strange kind of peace. The emptiness of the desert was not a lonely emptiness. It was a calm, powerful emptiness. It made her own thoughts feel very loud. She thought about her father. She thought about Finn and the sea. She thought about Juliet and the music. Her journey felt like a collection of different worlds. Each place was teaching her something new. The sea had taught her about healing. The city had taught her about joy. She wondered what the desert would teach her. After another hour, she saw it. A small cabin that seemed to grow out of the landscape. It was made of dark wood and stones. It was a simple, sturdy-looking place. It blended in perfectly with the desert around it. A thin trail of smoke was rising from a chimney. Someone was home. Her heart started to beat faster again. This was the most isolated place she had ever been. She felt a flicker of fear, but she kept walking. She walked up to the front of the cabin. There was a small covered porch. A man was sitting in a wooden chair. He was not looking at her. He was looking out at the desert. He was an older man, thin and wiry. He had a calm, weathered face and kind, intelligent eyes. He was completely still. He did not seem surprised to see her. He did not seem anything at all. He just sat there, as if he was a part of the landscape, like one of the rocks or the cacti. Sadie walked up the steps to the porch. She stood there for a moment. He did not turn to look at her. He seemed to be waiting. She said his name. Elias. He slowly turned his head. His eyes were the color of the pale desert sky. He looked at her, and his gaze was calm and steady. It felt like he was seeing everything about her. Sadie held out the postcard. She did not say anything else. He took the postcard. He looked at the picture of the red rocks. He turned it over and read the short message. A very small, very faint smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was a smile of memory. He looked up from the postcard and then back out at the desert. He did not invite her inside. He did not offer her a seat. He just said in a low, quiet voice, he remembered. That was all. Then he was silent again. The silence stretched on. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was a shared silence. Sadie did not feel the need to fill it with words. She just stood there. After a long time, Elias stood up. He pointed toward a narrow trail that led away from the cabin. He said, "Walk." Then he started walking. Sadie followed him. That first walk was a lesson in seeing. Elias did not talk. He would just occasionally stop. He would point at something, a small, almost invisible flower growing in the shade of a rock, the delicate papery skin that a snake had shed, the tiny tracks of a lizard in the sand. He was showing her that the desert was not empty. It was full of life. You just had to be quiet and patient enough to see it. He showed her a cactus that stored water inside its thick green flesh. He told her it could live for years without rain. He showed her a tough, scraggly bush that had roots that went deep into the earth to find water. Everything that lived here was a survivor. It had to be tough and patient and resilient. Sadie started to see the desert through his eyes. It was not a dead place. It was a place of incredible strength. It was a world of small, quiet miracles. They walked for hours. They did not talk about her father. They did not talk about her journey. They just walked and looked. When they returned to the cabin, the sun was setting. The desert was transformed. The setting sun painted the rocks and the sky in incredible colors, deep oranges and purples and reds. It was the most beautiful thing Sadie had ever seen. Elias made a simple meal of beans and bread. They ate in silence on the porch, watching the colors fade from the sky. He showed her a small room in the cabin where she could sleep. It had a simple cot and a clean wool blanket. Sadie fell asleep that night feeling a profound sense of peace. The next few days were all the same, and they were all different. Each morning, they would walk. Each walk was a different lesson. One day, their walk was a lesson in silence. They walked to a deep, narrow canyon. Inside the canyon, the air was still and cool. The silence was so complete that Sadie could hear the sound of her own heartbeat. At first, the silence was unsettling. It made the noisy thoughts in her head seem even louder. Her grief, her fear, her loneliness. They were all chattering away in her mind. But as she sat there in the deep quiet, something began to happen. The noisy thoughts started to fade. They did not go away completely, but they became quieter. The silence of the canyon was bigger than her sadness. She learned that silence was not an empty thing. It was a powerful thing. It could hold your sadness without judging it. It could give you space to just be. She sat on a rock for hours. She did not need to talk. She did not need to do anything. She just needed to be still and listen to the quiet. Another day, their walk was a lesson in time. Elias took her to a place where the rocks were covered in ancient drawings, petroglyphs. He told her they had been made by people who lived here thousands of years ago. There were drawings of animals and people and strange spiral shapes. Sadie touched the rough surface of the rock. She traced the lines of the ancient drawings with her finger. She thought about the hands that had carved these images so long ago. She thought about all the sunrises and sunsets these rocks had seen. She thought about all the people who had lived and died in this place. Her own life, her own grief, felt so small in comparison. Her pain, which felt so huge and all-consuming, was just a tiny drop in a vast ocean of time. The thought was not sad. It was comforting. It gave her a sense of perspective. The desert had a long memory. It had seen so much. It could hold her small story easily. Sadie started to spend her afternoons drawing in her sketchbook. She would find a quiet spot and just draw what she saw. She drew the sharp angles of the rocks. She drew the soft curves of the sand dunes. She drew the strange, beautiful shapes of the cacti. She tried to capture the feeling of the place, the vastness, the silence, the deep sense of peace. She was learning to be alone. In Port Clyde, she had had Finn's quiet company. In New Orleans, she had been surrounded by Juliet's loud, loving community. Here, she was truly alone with herself for the first time. Elias was a guide, a quiet presence. But he left her a lot of space. She was learning that she did not need other people to fill up the empty spaces inside her. She was learning to be comfortable in her own company. She was learning to listen to her own quiet thoughts. The long walk was not just about meeting her father's friends. It was about meeting herself. One night, Elias took her to a special place. It was a high mesa that overlooked the desert floor. He told her this was the place from the postcard, the place where he and her father had watched the stars fall. They sat on the edge of the mesa as the last light of the sun disappeared and the sky turned a deep, dark blue. The stars began to appear. At first, there were just a few. Then there were hundreds. Then there were thousands. Then there were too many to count. The sky in the desert was unlike any sky she had ever seen. There were no city lights to wash it out. It was a pure, perfect darkness. The stars were not just faint little specks. They were bright, brilliant diamonds scattered on black velvet. The Milky Way was a thick, glowing river of light that stretched from one horizon to the other. It was so beautiful it made her ache. It was a beauty that was ancient and powerful and completely indifferent to her. They sat in silence for a long time, just looking up. Then Elias spoke. His voice was a low whisper in the vast quiet. He pointed to a single bright star. He said that some of the stars they were looking at were already dead. He said they had burned out thousands of years ago, but their light was still traveling through space. It was still reaching them. It would continue to reach them for thousands of years more. He said, "Memory is like that. A person is gone, but their light is still traveling. Their light is still here. You just have to be in a quiet place to see it." Sadie thought about her father. She thought about the good man who had worked so hard in a small diner. She thought about the young adventurer from Juliet's stories. He was gone, but his light was still traveling. It was in the stories. It was in the postcards. It was inside of her. In the deep silence of the desert, under the brilliant light of the dead stars, she felt closer to him than she ever had before. She finally understood. Her father was not a ghost she was chasing. He was a light that she was carrying. Sadie knew it was time to leave. Her time in the desert had given her what she needed. It had given her a sense of peace. It had given her a sense of her own strength. She did not need to run from her sadness anymore. She could carry it. It was a part of her story. The next morning, she packed her bag. Elias was sitting on the porch, just as he had been when she arrived. He knew she was leaving. They did not need to say it. She walked up to him. She did not have the words to thank him for what he had given her, so she did not try. She just opened her sketchbook to the drawing she had made of the canyon, the drawing of the deep, silent place. She tore the page out of her book and gave it to him. It was her way of saying she understood. He took the drawing and looked at it. He gave her a small, quiet nod of approval. It was his way of saying she had learned the lesson. He walked with her to the end of the dirt road. They did not say goodbye. They did not need to. They just stood there for a moment in the warm morning sun. Then Sadie turned and started the long walk back to the town. She did not look back. She knew that the silence of the desert would always be a part of her now. It was a quiet place inside her that she could go to whenever she needed to. The long walk had brought her to a place of stillness, and now she was ready to move again. Chapter 6: The Fog of San Francisco. The bus ride out of the desert was like being pulled slowly from a deep, quiet dream. The sharp, clear lines of the red rocks and the vast, empty spaces began to soften. The landscape started to climb. The bus engine worked harder as it pulled them up into the high mountains of the Sierra Nevada. Sadie watched through the window as the world turned green again. Not the lush, wet green of the south, but a deep, powerful green of huge pine trees that stood like silent giants on the mountainsides. The air that came through the vents of the bus grew cool and clean. It smelled of pine needles and damp earth. For a day, they traveled through this world of mountains and trees. It was a different kind of quiet from the desert. The desert's quiet was about emptiness and space. The mountain's quiet was about a deep, ancient stillness. It was the quiet of things that grow slowly and live for a very long time. Sadie felt the peace of the desert still inside her. The quiet of the mountains did not disturb it. It just added another layer to it. Then the bus began to descend. The mountains gave way to a huge flat valley. It was a checkerboard of farms that stretched as far as the eye could see. The land was full of life, but it was a managed, organized life. It was a landscape of straight lines and neat rows. It felt like a place of work and purpose. After the wildness of the mountains and the desert, it seemed a little boring. The bus drove through this valley for many hours. The sun was hot, and the air was hazy with dust. Then, as the afternoon began to fade, the air started to change again. It grew cooler. Sadie could smell a new smell. It was a faint, salty smell, the smell of the ocean. Her heart beat a little faster. She was getting close. The land started to rise again, this time into smaller, rolling hills that were the color of golden grass. And then she saw it, a thick, white blanket of fog, so dense it looked like a solid wall. The bus drove straight into it. The world outside the window disappeared. There was only white, a soft, silent, mysterious white. The bus slowed down. The driver turned on the headlights. They cut two pale yellow beams into the thick fog. The sounds from outside were muffled, as if the fog was a thick blanket that absorbed all noise. Sadie felt a strange mix of excitement and uneasy. It was like entering another world, a secret world that was hidden from the sun. The bus crossed a huge red bridge. Sadie could only see the small parts of it that were right next to her window. The rest of it disappeared into the white fog above and below. She knew it was the famous Golden Gate Bridge, but she could not see its true size or shape. It was a ghost of a bridge in a city of ghosts. The bus finally pulled into the station. The station was a loud, busy place, but the moment Sadie stepped outside, the fog wrapped itself around her. The air was cool and damp on her skin. The city was not a clear picture. It was a collection of shapes and sounds that appeared and then disappeared into the mist. She could see the dark shapes of tall buildings. She could hear the clang of a cable car bell somewhere nearby. She could hear the lonely sound of a foghorn from the bay. It was a city of secrets. She found a room in an old hotel in a neighborhood full of crooked Victorian houses. The houses were painted beautiful colors, but the fog made the colors look soft and faded. Her room was small, and the floor tilted slightly to one side. The window looked out onto a narrow street. She could see the outlines of the houses across the street, but their details were lost in the mist. The fog was a constant presence. It would swirl and move, sometimes thinning so she could see more, sometimes growing so thick she could see nothing at all. It was beautiful and a little bit sad. It felt like the city was hiding. It felt like a place that did not want to show its true self. The next morning, Sadie began her search for Clara. The postcard was addressed to a street in a neighborhood called the Haight-Ashbury. The picture on the front was a faded color photograph of a large group of young people sitting in a park. They had long hair and were wearing colorful clothes. They were holding signs, but the words on the signs were too small to read. The message on the back was written in her father's younger, more energetic handwriting. It said, "Clara, we are going to change the world. I can feel it. The revolution is not just in the streets. It's in the music and in our hearts. Stay strong." It was a message of pure, fiery hope. It was the message of a young man who believed he could make the world a better place. Sadie took a bus to the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood. The bus was full of a strange mix of people. Young people with brightly colored hair and older people who looked like they had lived in the neighborhood for a long time. The neighborhood itself was a riot of color. The old Victorian houses were painted in psychedelic patterns. The shops had strange names and sold things like vintage clothes, records, and incense. There was a feeling of history here, a feeling that something important had happened on these streets. But it also felt a little bit like a performance, like a place that was trying to remember what it used to be. She found the address from the postcard. It was not a house where a young activist might live. It was now a trendy ice cream shop. The building was painted bright pink. Loud music was playing inside. People were lined up on the sidewalk, waiting to buy expensive ice cream. Sadie stood across the street and looked at it. The world her father had written about was gone. It had been replaced by this. It had been paved over and painted pink. A deep sense of disappointment washed over her. This stop on her journey was not just about finding a person. It was about finding a piece of her father's spirit. And it seemed like that spirit was nowhere to be found here. She did not know what to do next. Clara was gone. The address was a dead end. Sadie felt lost. For the first time on her journey, she felt like she might fail. She wandered the streets of the neighborhood for hours. She looked at the faces of the people, hoping to see a sign of the past. But she saw only the present. She went to the park from the picture on the postcard. It was a beautiful park, full of huge, old trees. But the young people sitting on the grass now were not planning a revolution. They were looking at their phones. Sadie sat on a bench and felt a sadness that was different from her grief. It was a sadness for a lost time, a lost dream, a lost hope. She could not give up. She had come too far. She thought about what to do. She needed to find a new address for Clara. She went to the public library. It was a large modern building. She found the public computers. She did not know Clara's last name. She searched online for activists in San Francisco from that time period. She found old articles and photographs. It was like digging for treasure. After hours of searching, she found a small black and white picture of a group of protesters. A young woman in the picture looked strong and determined. The caption underneath the picture listed the names. One of them was Clara Bellwether. Sadie felt a jolt of excitement. She had a last name. Now she could search for her. She searched for Clara Bellwether in San Francisco. The search results were confusing. There were no activists with that name. But there was a prominent lawyer, a partner at a huge law firm called Bellwether, Stone and Associates. The name was the same. Could it be her? Sadie looked at the picture of the lawyer on the law firm's website. The woman was older now. Her hair was short and perfectly styled. She was wearing an expensive business suit. Her face was hard and serious. It was hard to see the young, fiery activist in this woman's face. But the eyes were the same. There was a shadow of the same determination. It had to be her. The law firm was in the financial district, in a tall glass skyscraper. It felt like the other side of the universe from a park full of hopeful young people. The next day, Sadie took a bus to the financial district. The fog was thick again that morning. The tops of the skyscrapers disappeared into the white mist. The streets were crowded with people in expensive suits. They all walked very fast. They all looked very serious. They were all talking on their phones. The energy here was completely different from the rest of the city. It was an energy of money and power. It was sharp and cold and a little bit scary. Sadie felt completely out of place in her old jeans and her father's worn sweater. She felt like a small, slow-moving creature in a river of fast, hungry sharks. She found the building. It was a tower of dark glass and steel. It was so tall she had to crane her neck back to see where it ended in the fog. It was an intimidating building. It was designed to make you feel small. She walked into the lobby. The lobby was huge and cold. The floor was made of shiny black marble. The air was silent and still. The only sound was the soft clicking of her own shoes on the floor. A woman sat behind a huge modern desk. She was wearing a headset and staring at a computer screen. She did not look up when Sadie approached. Sadie had to clear her throat to get her attention. The woman looked up. Her expression was not friendly. It was a look of mild annoyance. Sadie asked if she could see Clara Bellwether. The woman asked if she had an appointment. Sadie said no. The woman's expression grew even colder. She said that Ms. Bellwether was a very busy woman. She did not see people without an appointment. Sadie tried to explain. She said it was a personal matter. The woman was not interested. She was already looking back at her computer screen. She had dismissed Sadie completely. Sadie did not leave. She just stood there. She did not know what else to do. She felt a familiar wave of defeat. This world was not for her. She did not know the rules. She did not belong here. She was about to turn and leave when a woman stepped out of an elevator. She was a younger woman, wearing a stylish dress and carrying a tablet. She was walking quickly and talking to the receptionist. Sadie heard her say Clara's name. This must be her assistant. Sadie took a deep breath. She had to try one more time. She walked over to the assistant. She said, "Excuse me." The assistant looked at her with the same impatient expression as the receptionist. Sadie said, "Please, I have a message for Clara. It's from my father. His name was Arthur." The name meant nothing to the assistant. She started to shake her head, but Sadie did not give up. She said, "Please, it is very important. It's about who she used to be." The last words seemed to catch the assistant's attention. She looked at Sadie with a flicker of curiosity. She sighed. She said, "Wait here." She walked away down a long, white hallway. Sadie waited. She stood in the cold, silent lobby for what felt like a very long time. People in suits walked past her. They did not look at her. She was invisible to them. She felt like a ghost. Finally, the assistant came back. She did not look happy. She said, "Ms. Bellwether will give you 5 minutes." The assistant led her down the long white hallway. The walls were covered in abstract art that looked expensive but had no feeling. The carpet was so thick that their footsteps made no sound. They stopped in front of a large wooden door. The assistant knocked once, then opened it. She told Sadie to go in. The office was huge. One entire wall was a window that looked out over the city. But today, the window looked out on nothing but a solid wall of white fog. It made the room feel like it was floating in the clouds. A huge modern desk sat in the middle of the room, and behind the desk sat Clara Bellwether. She was just like her picture on the website. Her gray suit was perfectly tailored. Her hair was perfect. Her face was a mask of professional calm. She did not stand up. She did not smile. She just looked at Sadie with cold, impatient eyes. She pointed to a small, uncomfortable-looking chair in front of her desk. She said, "You have 5 minutes." Her voice was sharp and clear and used to being obeyed. Sadie's hands were shaking. She sat down. The chair was as uncomfortable as it looked. She felt like a small child being called into the principal's office. She reached into her backpack and took out the postcard. The postcard looked so old and small and unimportant in this huge, modern office. She put it on the desk. She pushed it across the shiny wood surface toward Clara. She said, "My father, Arthur, wrote this for you a long time ago." Clara looked at the postcard. She did not pick it up. She looked at it with a strange expression. It was a mix of confusion and annoyance. She said, "Arthur, I do not know anyone named Arthur." Her voice was cold and dismissive. Sadie's heart sank. Maybe she had made a terrible mistake. Maybe this was the wrong person after all. But then something happened. Clara's eyes kept looking at the postcard. Her professional mask started to crack. A flicker of something crossed her face. A memory. A ghost. She slowly reached out her hand. Her fingers, which were covered in expensive rings, trembled slightly as they touched the old piece of cardboard. She picked it up. She looked at the picture of the young people in the park. She turned it over and read her father's words. Sadie watched her face. It was like watching ice melt. The hard lines of her face began to soften. The coldness in her eyes was replaced by a look of profound shock, and then a deep, overwhelming sadness. Her whole body seemed to sag. She put a hand to her mouth. A small, broken sound came from her throat. She looked at Sadie. Her eyes were full of tears. She whispered, "Arthur, my God, I had forgotten." Clara stood up. She walked over to the huge window and stared out at the fog. Her back was to Sadie. Her shoulders were shaking. She was crying. She stood there for a long time, crying silently. The 5 minutes she had given Sadie came and went. The assistant knocked on the door and opened it a little. Clara waved her away without turning around. The door closed. There was only the sound of Clara's quiet sobs in the big, silent room. Sadie did not know what to do. She just sat there, a witness to this woman's sudden, powerful grief. Finally, Clara turned around. Her face was wet with tears. Her perfect makeup was ruined. She looked like a different person. She looked broken and real. She walked back to her desk and sat down. She looked at the postcard again. She touched it gently, as if it were a holy object. She started to talk. Her voice was no longer sharp and powerful. It was soft and full of pain. She told Sadie that she had not just forgotten Arthur. She had tried to forget him. She had tried to forget that entire part of her life. It was too painful to remember the person she used to be, the girl in the park who believed she could change the world. She told Sadie that she and Arthur had been more than friends. They had been comrades. They believed in the same things. They believed in justice. They believed in fighting for a better world. She told Sadie stories about her father, stories that were so different from the ones Juliet had told. Juliet's stories were about a man who loved music and joy. Clara's stories were about a man who was full of fire and a deep sense of moral purpose. He was not just an observer of life. He was a participant, a fighter. She told Sadie about the protests they had gone to, the long marches, the sit-ins. She said Arthur was not a leader. He was not a loudspeaker, but he was the heart of their group. He had a quiet strength and a deep, unwavering belief in what was right. He was the one who would stay up all night making signs. He was the one who would talk to the people who were scared. He had a powerful sense of empathy. He felt the pain of the world, and he wanted to make it better. Sadie listened, mesmerized. This was another new father, a man she had never known, a man with a deep and passionate soul. Then Clara's voice grew sadder. She told Sadie about how it had all fallen apart. The world did not change. The fight was long and hard. People got tired. People gave up. She got tired. She was tired of being poor. She was tired of fighting a system that was too big and too powerful. She wanted a comfortable life. She wanted security. So she made a choice. She left that world behind. She went to law school. She learned how to play the game. And she was very good at it. She became the very thing she used to fight against. A part of the powerful system. She told Sadie that her last conversation with Arthur had been a terrible argument. He had called her a sellout. He said she had betrayed everything they believed in, and she had told him he was a naive fool, that he would never change anything. They had said terrible, hurtful things to each other, and they had never spoken again. Clara opened a drawer in her huge desk. She pulled out an old, dusty photo album. She opened it on the desk. The pictures were black and white. They were pictures of the young people from the postcard. There she was, a young Clara with long, wild hair and a fiery look in her eyes. And there he was, her father. He was young. He had long hair and a beard. He was holding a protest sign. He was not smiling. He looked serious and determined, but his eyes were kind. It was the same man from the diner, the same kind eyes. but they were full of a fire that Sadie had never seen. She saw a picture of her father and Clara standing together, their arms around each other. They were both smiling. They looked so young and so full of hope. It was a picture of a world that was gone forever. Clara closed the book. The memories were too painful. She looked at Sadie. She said, "He was the best person I ever knew, and I threw him away." The grief in her voice was a raw, open wound. Sadie realized that her father's unsent postcard was not an apology. It was a reminder of a promise, a reminder of a dream. And it had arrived 30 years too late. Or maybe it had arrived right on time. Clara looked around her huge, expensive office. She looked at the view of the fog. She looked at the postcard in her hand. A new look came into her eyes. The old fire, the determination of the young girl in the picture. She picked up the phone on her desk. She called her assistant. She said, "Cancel all my appointments for the rest of the day and for the rest of the week." Then she said something that made Sadie's heart stop. She said, "And find me a good lawyer. I am going to need one. I am resigning from the firm." She hung up the phone. She looked at Sadie. She had a strange, wild look in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had just jumped off a cliff. It was a look of terror and of absolute freedom. She said, "I do not know what I am going to do, but I cannot do this anymore. It is a lie." She had spent her whole life building this comfortable, powerful world, and in a single moment, because of a ghost from her past, she was tearing it all down. Sadie sat there, stunned. She had just wanted to deliver a message. She had not meant to change someone's entire life. She started to understand what the fortune teller in New Orleans had said. The messages were not for the dead. They were for the living. Her journey was not just a quiet walk through the past. It was a powerful force that was shaking up the present. She was not just a witness. She was a catalyst. She was an agent of change. The thought was both wonderful and terrifying. She was connected to these people. Their stories were becoming a part of her story. Her long walk was weaving their lives together, and it was weaving her own life into a new and unexpected shape. Chapter 7: An Unexpected Detour. Sadie left San Francisco in a cloud of her own thoughts. The city, wrapped in its soft gray fog, disappeared behind her. The meeting with Clara had shaken her. It was a new and heavy weight in her backpack, a weight that was not physical. She had always seen herself as a quiet observer on this journey, a humble mail carrier for the ghosts of her father's past. But with Clara, she had been something more. She had been a stone thrown into a still pond. The ripples from that stone had changed the course of a woman's life. The thought was terrifying. It was a responsibility she had never asked for. The bus carried her south, away from the coast, back into the wide, sun-baked heart of California. The green hills, still damp from the coastal fog, slowly turned to a dry, golden brown. The landscape flattened out into the vast agricultural expanse of the Central Valley. For hours and hours, the view outside the window was the same. Neat rows of crops stretched to the horizon. Farmhouses sat far apart in a haze of heat. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue. It was a landscape of hard work and little beauty. It was a place of straight lines and predictable patterns. The bus was hot and stuffy. The air conditioning was weak. Sadie leaned her head against the warm glass of the window and felt a deep sense of weariness. Her journey had been a series of powerful moments. The quiet healing of the sea in Maine, the joyful noise of life in New Orleans, the deep, silent wisdom of the desert, the startling collision with the past in San Francisco. Each stop had taken something from her, and each stop had given her something new. Now, in the boring, endless landscape of the valley, she felt empty. She was between worlds. She was no longer the sad, lost girl who had left home. But she did not yet know who she was becoming. She was just a traveler, moving through a place that had no meaning for her, on her way to another place that was only a name on a postcard. She felt a deep longing for a place to rest, not just for a night, but for a long time. A place where she could be still. A place where she was not a stranger. A place that felt like home. But she had no home. Her home was a box of postcards and a backpack full of worn-out clothes. The bus made a stop in a small, forgotten town in the middle of the valley. The town looked tired. The buildings were faded. The paint was peeling. The heat seemed to press down on everything, making it all seem slow and heavy. The bus station was just a small, dirty room with a few plastic chairs and a vending machine. The bus driver announced they would be stopping for 30 minutes. A few passengers got off to smoke or stretch their legs. Sadie felt a need for fresh air, even if the air was hot and dusty. She left her backpack on her seat. She had done this at every stop. It was a habit. The backpack was heavy. It was easier to leave it. She had her wallet and her phone in her pocket. She thought it was safe. The bus was a small, contained world. She did not imagine that anything bad could happen. She stepped outside. The heat hit her like a physical force. She walked a few steps away from the bus just to be out of the smell of the diesel fumes. She stood under the small shade of a scraggly tree and looked at the town. It was a sad-looking place. The windows of the shops were dusty. A few old pickup trucks were parked along the street. There was no one walking around. The town seemed to be asleep, or maybe it was dead. She felt a wave of gratitude that she was just passing through. She could not imagine being stuck in a place like this. The thought was a small, dark shadow that passed through her mind and then was gone. After a few minutes, she walked back to the bus. She was one of the first people to get back on. She walked down the narrow aisle to her seat, and then she saw it, the empty space where her backpack had been. For a moment, her mind did not understand. She just stared at the empty seat. She thought maybe she was in the wrong row. She looked at the seat number. It was the right one. She looked on the floor. She looked in the overhead rack. The backpack was gone. A cold feeling started in her stomach, a tight, icy knot. It spread through her body, making her feel numb. This could not be happening. It was a mistake. Someone must have moved it by accident. She walked to the front of the bus. The driver was just getting back on. Sadie's voice was shaky. She told him her bag was gone. The driver sighed. He had the tired, bored look of a man who had seen everything. He asked her if she was sure. He did not seem to care at all. Sadie insisted. Her bag was gone. The driver made a short announcement on the bus intercom. He asked if anyone had taken a brown backpack by mistake. No one answered. The bus was silent. The other passengers stared at her. Some looked sorry for her. Some just looked annoyed that they were being delayed. The driver told her he could not wait. He had a schedule to keep. He told her she should get off the bus and report it to the police. Sadie looked at him in disbelief. He was just going to leave her here, in this empty, forgotten town, with nothing. The cold knot in her stomach turned into a hot, rising panic. She pleaded with him. Everything she owned was in that bag. Her clothes, her money, her sketchbook, the postcards. The word postcards caught in her throat. The box, her father's box. The thought of it being gone was a physical pain. It was like losing him all over again. The driver just shrugged. It was not his problem. He told her she had to get off the bus. He had to go. Sadie stumbled off the bus. Her legs felt weak. She stood on the dirty pavement of the bus station and watched as the bus door hissed shut. The engine roared to life. The bus pulled away from the curb, leaving behind a cloud of dark smoke. She watched it go down the sad, empty street until it was just a small speck in the distance. And then it was gone. She was completely, utterly alone. She stood there for a long time. The sun beat down on her head. The dust from the road settled on her clothes. She did not move. She could not move. She was in shock. The world seemed to have gone silent. All she could hear was a loud ringing in her own ears. Her journey was over. Her father's box was gone. Her sketchbook, with all the drawings of the sea and the city and the desert, was gone. Her own small story was gone. Her father's story was gone. Everything was gone. She had nothing. She was nothing. Just a girl standing in the dirt on the side of the road in a town with no name. A wave of despair so powerful it almost knocked her over, washed through her. This was it. This was the end. She had been a fool to think she could do this. She had been a fool to think she could outrun her sadness. Now it had caught up with her, and it was going to swallow her whole. She wanted to just lie down on the ground and disappear. She wanted to close her eyes and never open them again. She had never felt so hopeless, not even when her father died. Then she had been numb with grief. Now she was feeling everything, and it was too much to bear. She finally moved. She walked with no purpose. Her feet just carried her. She walked down the main street of the sad little town. She looked in the dusty windows of the closed shops. She saw her own reflection. A thin, tired-looking girl with fear in her eyes. She did not recognize herself. She had a few dollars in her pocket. Not enough for a hotel. Not even enough for another bus ticket, even if she knew where to go. She was truly stuck. As the afternoon wore on, a new feeling started to mix with the despair. Hunger. It was a dull, aching pain in her stomach. She had not eaten since morning. She saw a small sign down a side street. It was a faded red sign that just said, "Diner." Her heart twisted. A diner. The one place in the world she did not want to see. The one place that would be full of the ghosts of her father. but the smell of food was coming from it. A simple, greasy smell of frying onions. The smell made her stomach ache even more. She had no choice. She had to find a way to get some food. She walked to the diner. It was a small, shabby building. The windows were streaked with grease. She pushed open the door. A little bell tinkled. The sound was so familiar, it was like a knife in her heart. The inside of the diner was dark and gloomy. There were a few cracked vinyl booths and a short counter with a few stools. The air was thick with the smell of old coffee and stale grease. A few old men sat at the counter, stirring their coffee. They did not look up when she came in. It was a place for people with nowhere else to go. A woman was behind the counter. She was wiping it down with a damp cloth. She was a thin woman with tired, worried eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked at Sadie with no expression. She was probably used to seeing sad, lost people wander into her diner. Sadie walked up to the counter. She did not have enough money to buy a meal. She knew what she had to do. She had to ask for a job. The words felt like stones in her mouth. She asked the woman if she needed any help. She said she would do anything. She would wash dishes. The woman looked her up and down. She saw Sadie's clean clothes and soft hands. She did not look like someone who washed dishes for a living. The woman, whose name was Maria, said she did not have enough business to hire anyone. Sadie could see that was true. The diner was almost empty, but Sadie was desperate. She told Maria she would work for just a meal. She said she was a hard worker. Maria looked at her for a long time. She saw the desperation in Sadie's eyes. It was a look she knew well. She had seen it in her own eyes in the mirror many times. Maria sighed, a long, tired sigh. She told Sadie she could wash the dishes that were piled up in the back. In return, she could have a bowl of soup. Sadie followed Maria into the small, cluttered kitchen. A huge pile of dirty dishes was stacked in a metal sink. The kitchen was hot and smelled strongly of grease. It was so different from her father's kitchen. His kitchen had always been clean and organized. This kitchen was a place of chaos and exhaustion. Maria showed her the sink. She gave her an old, stained apron. Then she went back out to the front. Sadie stood in front of the sink. She looked at the pile of dirty plates and greasy pans. The sight of it filled her with a profound sadness. This was what her life had become. She was back in a diner kitchen, but she was not her father's daughter, helping him with a sense of love and purpose. She was a stranger, washing dishes for a bowl of soup. It felt like the final, cruel joke of a universe that did not care about her. She turned on the hot water. She put her hands in the greasy water. The feeling was horrible. But she started to work. She washed each plate. She scrubbed each pan. The physical work was a small relief. It gave her something to focus on besides the black hole of despair that was opening up inside her. As she worked, the sounds of the diner kitchen surrounded her. The sizzle of something on the grill, the clatter of a plate being put on the counter, the low murmur of conversation from the front. Each sound was a memory. Each sound was a ghost. She remembered the sound of her father's knife chopping vegetables on a wooden board, a fast, steady rhythm. She remembered the sound of him humming a little tune as he stirred a big pot of soup. She remembered the way he would call out, "Order up!" in his big, cheerful voice. The memories were so clear, so vivid, that they were physically painful. She had to close her eyes. She felt tears mixing with the greasy dishwater on her hands. She thought about giving up. Not just giving up on her journey, giving up on everything. It would be so easy to just stay here, to wash dishes in this sad little diner until she became as faded and tired as the town itself. She could just disappear. No one would know. No one would care. The thought was seductive. It was the promise of an end to the pain. She finished the dishes. The sink was empty and clean. Her back ached. Her hands were red and raw. She went back out to the front. Maria gave her a bowl of soup. It was a thin, watery vegetable soup. Sadie sat down in a booth in the corner. She ate the soup slowly. It was not very good, but it was warm. It filled the empty space in her stomach. As she ate, she watched Maria. She watched her move behind the counter. She moved with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She took the orders. She cooked the food on the small, greasy grill. She poured the coffee. She did everything herself. Sadie saw the worry lines on her forehead. She saw the way her shoulders slumped. She saw the same look in her eyes that she had seen in her father's eyes during the last months of the diner. It was the look of someone who was working too hard for too little. The look of someone who was slowly being crushed by the weight of a failing business. Sadie watched as a family came in. A mother and father and 2 small children. They ordered burgers. Maria cooked them. The burgers were thin and gray. The buns were dry. The children picked at their food. They did not seem to like it. The parents looked disappointed. They paid their bill and left. Maria watched them go with a sad, defeated look on her face. And in that moment, something shifted inside Sadie. A tiny spark flickered in the darkness of her despair. It was the spark of empathy. The empathy that her father had had. The empathy that Clara had talked about. She was not just seeing a stranger. She was seeing her father's story all over again. A good person trying their best and failing. And she could not just sit there and watch it happen. She finished her soup. She went up to the counter. She told Maria that she knew how to cook. She told her about her father's diner. She said she could help. Maria looked at her with suspicion. She did not want charity. She did not want pity. But Sadie was not offering pity. She was offering a solution. Sadie told her to let her cook for 1 day. If the customers did not like the food, she would leave and never come back. What did Maria have to lose? Maria was too tired to argue. She looked around her empty diner. She looked at the worried expression on Sadie's face. She saw something more than desperation there now. She saw a flicker of strength, a flicker of purpose. She nodded. She said, "1 day." The next morning, Sadie was in the kitchen before the sun came up. The kitchen was still a sad, cluttered place. But to Sadie, it was now a place of possibility. She looked at the ingredients Maria had. Simple things. Potatoes, onions, flour, eggs, the basics. She thought about her father's recipes. They were not fancy recipes. They were simple, honest recipes that made people feel good. She decided to start with something simple. A good soup, not the thin, watery soup from yesterday. A real soup. a thick, hearty potato soup. She found a recipe in her memory. Her father had made it on cold, rainy days. She started to work. The feel of the knife in her hand was familiar and comforting. The rhythm of chopping the vegetables was a steady, calming sound. The smell of the onions cooking in a little bit of butter was the smell of home. As she cooked, she was not just remembering her father. She was channeling him, his care, his attention to detail, his belief that good food could make the world a little bit better. The first customers of the day were the old men who always sat at the counter. They ordered coffee and toast, like they always did. But Maria offered them a small cup of the new soup. They were suspicious at first, but they tried it. Sadie watched from the kitchen. She saw one of the old men take a spoonful. He paused. He took another spoonful. A small, surprised smile appeared on his face. He said something to Maria. Maria smiled, a real smile. It changed her whole face. It made her look younger. By lunchtime, more people started to come in. The word had gotten around the small town. Something was different at the diner. They ordered the soup. They ordered the simple sandwiches that Sadie made on good, thick bread. They ate everything on their plates. They left smiling. For the first time in a long time, the diner was full. The room was filled with the sound of happy conversation. Sadie felt a feeling she had not felt in a long time. It was a deep, quiet pride. It was not about her father. It was about her. She had done this with her own 2 hands. She had taken simple ingredients and she had made something good. She had taken a sad, empty room and she had filled it with warmth and life. She realized something profound in that moment. Her father's legacy was not in the box of postcards. The box was just a collection of paper and ink. His real legacy was inside of her. It was in her hands. It was in her memory. It was in her ability to cook, to nurture, to bring comfort to people through food. She did not need the box to carry him with her. He was already there. He had always been there. That afternoon, a local police officer came in for lunch. He was a kind-faced man. Maria told him Sadie's story. She told him about the stolen backpack. The officer listened carefully. He said that sometimes stolen bags were dumped after the valuable things were taken. He said he would check a few places. Sadie did not have much hope, but she was grateful for his kindness. She made him the best grilled cheese sandwich he had ever had. The next day, Sadie cooked again. She made her father's famous tomato soup. The diner was even busier than the day before. Maria was rushing around trying to keep up. She was tired, but it was a good kind of tired. It was the tiredness of success, not of failure. She was smiling. She was laughing with the customers. The diner was a different place. It was coming back to life. Late that afternoon, the police officer came back. He was carrying her backpack. It was dirty, but it was not damaged. The officer said he had found it in a ditch on the side of the highway. Sadie's heart leaped into her throat. She took the bag from him. Her hands were shaking. She opened it. Her clothes were still there. Her sketchbook was there. And at the bottom, wrapped in a towel, was the wooden box. She opened it. The postcards were all there. Safe. The officer explained that the thief had probably been looking for a laptop or a camera. When he found only clothes and old letters, he had thrown the bag away. Sadie felt a huge wave of relief wash over her. It was a miracle. But it was a strange kind of miracle. Because as she held the box in her hands, she realized that she did not need it in the same way anymore. She was so happy to have it back. But it did not define her anymore. It was a part of her story. It was not the whole story. She knew she had to continue her journey. Her work here was done. She had helped Maria. The diner was on its feet again. And more importantly, she had found a piece of herself that she had thought was lost forever. That night, she did something special. She wrote down some of her father's best recipes for Maria. The potato soup, the tomato soup, the perfect pancakes. She wrote them on clean white paper in her neatest handwriting. It was a gift. It was a piece of her father's legacy that she could leave behind. The next morning, she gave the recipes to Maria. Maria held them like they were a precious treasure. There were tears in her eyes. She tried to pay Sadie for her work, but Sadie would not take any money. She said that Maria had given her something much more valuable. She had given her a place to land when she was falling. She had given her a chance to find herself again. They said goodbye. It was a quiet goodbye between two women who understood each other without needing many words. Sadie shouldered her backpack. It felt lighter now. She walked to the bus station, the same sad little station. But it did not look so sad to her anymore. It just looked like a place to start again. She bought a ticket with the money Maria had insisted she take for her travels. A bus was coming. It would take her to her next destination. The long walk was not over, but she was walking with a new strength. She was no longer just her father's daughter. She was herself, a cook, an artist, a survivor, and she was ready for whatever the road had in store for her. Chapter 8. The Road Home. The last part of the journey felt different. The bus carried Sadie eastward, away from the flat, sun-baked valley and into the rolling hills that marked the edge of the country. The frantic energy of the search was gone. The deep, quiet listening of the desert had settled into her bones. The unexpected crisis in the small-town diner had left her with a new, quiet confidence. She no longer felt like a leaf being blown by the wind. She felt like a traveler who was walking her own path. She still had a few postcards left in the box. One for a town in the mountains of Tennessee, another for a small city in Ohio. She delivered them. Each stop was its own small story, its own small connection to her father's hidden life. She met a woman in Tennessee who had taught her father how to play the guitar. The woman was old now, and her hands were stiff with arthritis, but she still had a guitar that Arthur had given her. She played a simple, beautiful song for Sadie. It was a song about mountains and homecoming. In Ohio, Sadie found the son of one of her father's old army buddies. The man himself had passed away years ago. The son, a man Sadie's own age, had a box of old letters his father had saved. He and Sadie sat on his front porch and read through the letters. They were full of the boring, everyday details of a soldier's life. But they were also full of a deep and abiding friendship between two young men who were far from home. These last encounters were gentle, They were not filled with the high drama of Clara's life-changing decision or the deep, silent wisdom of Elias. They were just quiet moments of human connection. They were small, warm lights in the long twilight of her journey. With each stop, the world outside her bus window became more familiar. The trees were the kinds of trees she had grown up with. The houses looked like the houses in her own town. She was moving closer to home. A strange feeling started to grow inside her. It was a mix of excitement and fear. She was ready to go back, but she was also terrified. What was she going back to? An empty apartment, a closed diner, a town full of memories that were both precious and painful. The person who had left that town all those months ago was gone. Sadie did not know if the new person she had become would have a place there. She was a stranger to herself. She would be a stranger in her own hometown. As the miles grew shorter, she spent more time looking through her sketchbook. It was no longer a book of empty white pages. It was full. It was a dense, colorful map of her journey. There were the gray, rocky shores of Maine and the serious, weathered face of Finn. There were the vibrant, chaotic streets of New Orleans and the joyful, laughing face of Juliet. There were the vast, silent landscapes of the desert and the deep, quiet eyes of Elias. There was the foggy, secret world of San Francisco and the painful, beautiful transformation of Clara. There was the dusty, forgotten diner in the valley and the tired, hopeful smile of Maria. Her drawings were not just pictures of places and people. They were pictures of feelings. They were a record of her own inner journey. She had left home to find her father, but along the way, she had found herself. She was an artist. She saw the world in lines and colors and shapes. This sketchbook was the proof. It was the story of who she was. She finally reached the last postcard in the box. She had saved it. She had looked at it 100 times, but she had not really understood it. The front of the postcard was not a picture of a place. It was a simple, hand-drawn map. It was a map of her own hometown. The streets were drawn in her father's familiar, slightly messy handwriting. There was the diner, marked with a small star. There was the park. There was the school she had gone to. It was the small, simple world of her childhood. She turned the postcard over. There was no name. There was no address. There was only a short message written in her father's hand. The message said, "For my Sadie, your journey starts when you are ready." She held the postcard in her hands, and the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. She finally understood. The entire journey, the whole long walk, had not been about her father's past. It had been about her future. Her father had known she was trapped. He had known she was afraid to leave. He knew his death would leave her lost and alone. The box of postcards was not a burden he had left her. It was a gift. It was a map. A treasure map where the treasure was not gold or jewels, but herself. He had given her a reason to leave. He had given her a path to follow, a path that would lead her out into the big, wide world. A path that would force her to be brave. A path that would teach her who she was. And the final destination on that map was not a stranger's house. It was her own life. The blank postcard was an invitation to start her own story. The tears that filled her eyes were not tears of sadness. They were tears of a deep, overwhelming love and gratitude. He had been a good father, right to the very end. He had given her the greatest gift a parent can give a child. He had given her the world, and then he had shown her the way back to herself. The bus pulled into the small, familiar station in her hometown. The station had not changed. It still smelled of diesel fumes and stale coffee. But Sadie had changed. She stepped off the bus. The air was cool and crisp. It was autumn, the same autumn that had been starting when she left. But it felt different now. She took a deep breath. It was the air of home. It did not make her feel trapped anymore. It just felt familiar. She shouldered her backpack. It did not feel so heavy now. She started to walk, not toward the diner, not yet. She walked through the town. The streets were the same. The buildings were the same. But she was seeing them with new eyes. She was seeing them with the eyes of an artist. She noticed the way the late afternoon light fell on the old brick buildings. She noticed the pattern of the fallen leaves on the sidewalk. It was a quiet, pretty little town. It was not a cage. It was just a place where she had grown up, a place that was a part of her story. She walked to the diner. The old red neon sign was dark. The windows were dusty and empty. The words, "The North Star Diner," were faded. She stood across the street and looked at it. The sight of it did not fill her with the same crushing sadness it once had. The pain was still there, a dull, familiar ache. But it was mixed with other things now. It was mixed with love and with gratitude. The diner was not a symbol of failure anymore. It was a symbol of her father's hard work, of his love for his community. It was a place where he had made people happy. It was a good place. It was just closed. It was a chapter that was over. She was not angry about it anymore. She was just at peace with it. She walked to the apartment door. She still had the key. She had not left it on the counter after all. She had put it in a small pocket of her backpack. She had not even remembered doing it. But some part of her had known she would come back. The apartment was just as she had left it, cold and silent and full of dust. But it did not feel like a tomb anymore. It just felt like an empty room, a blank page, a place waiting for a new story. She spent the next few days cleaning. She washed the windows. She swept the floors. She dusted the old furniture. The physical work felt good. It was a way of clearing out the old sadness, a way of making space for something new. She went into her father's room for the first time. It was hard, but she did it. She packed his clothes into boxes to give away. She found old photographs, pictures of him as a young man, the man she had met on her journey. She smiled. She was not sad. She was just happy to have known him, all of him. She did not know what she was going to do. She did not have much money. She could not reopen the diner. She did not want to. That was her father's dream, not hers. She needed to find her own dream. She sat at the small kitchen table, the same table where she had sat in her deep grief and opened the box of postcards for the first time. She opened her sketchbook. She looked through all her drawings: the sea, the city, the desert, the mountains, the faces of the people she had met. Her journey was a beautiful story. And then she had an idea. It was a small idea at first, just a flicker. But it grew. It was an idea that was born from every single stop on her journey. It was an idea that was made of salt and music and silence and fog and the smell of good food cooking in a small town diner. She sold the apartment and the diner. The building was old, but it was in the center of town. She got a fair price for it. It was not a lot of money, but it was enough. It was a seed. She did not use the money to buy a new house. She rented a small, sunny storefront on a quiet side street. The shop was old and had big windows. It was the perfect place for a new beginning. She spent the next few weeks fixing it up. She painted the walls a warm, welcoming color. She built a simple wooden desk. She did not have much to put in the shop. She did not need much. She hung a few of her best drawings on the walls. The picture of Finn mending his nets. The picture of Juliet playing her clarinet. A painting she made from a sketch of the desert at sunset. Then she made a sign. She painted it herself in careful, beautiful letters. The sign did not say travel agency. That was not the right word. The word was too cold, too commercial. The sign said, the Postcard Travel Company. Underneath, in smaller letters, it said, Journeys for the Heart. Her idea was simple, and it was unique. She was not going to sell plane tickets or hotel packages. She was going to sell stories. She was going to help people find their own long walks. Her clients would not be tourists. They would be travelers, people who were lost, people who were grieving, people who were looking for something but did not know what it was. She would be their guide. Her first client was a young woman from her town whose mother had recently passed away. The young woman was lost in her own gray sea of grief. She did not know what to do. Sadie sat with her. She did not offer easy answers or cheap sympathy. She just listened. She listened to the young woman's stories about her mother. And then she opened her sketchbook. She showed her the drawings of the sea in Maine. She told her about the quiet strength of the old fisherman. She did not tell the woman to go to Maine. She designed a journey just for her, a journey to a quiet place by the water, a place where she could be still and listen to the breathing of the world, a place where she could learn to carry her sadness. Her business grew, slowly at first and then steadily. The people who came to her were not looking for a vacation. They were looking for a transformation. She would listen to their stories. She would learn what they needed. For a man who was tired of his busy, stressful job, she designed a journey to the desert, a journey of silence and solitude. For a family that had grown apart, she designed a journey to a city full of music and life, a journey to help them find their rhythm again. She would create a custom itinerary for each person, but it was more than just a list of places to go. It was a story, a narrative journey. She would give them a beautiful handmade book. The book would be filled with her own drawings, with maps, with suggestions for things to see and do. But it would also be full of blank pages, pages for them to write their own stories, pages for them to draw their own pictures. She was not just sending them on a trip. She was sending them on a quest to find themselves. The final scene of the story is a quiet one. It is a year later. Sadie is in her small, sunny shop. The walls are now covered with postcards from her clients. They are from all over the world. They are not pictures of famous landmarks. They are pictures of small, quiet moments. A picture of a sunset over the ocean. A picture of a smiling face in a crowded market. Each one has a message on the back, a message of thanks, a message of discovery. Her shop is not just a business, it is a collection of happy endings. Sadie is sitting at her desk. She is working on a new journey for a new client. The late afternoon sun is streaming through the big window. It lights up the dust motes dancing in the air. It makes the colors in her drawings on the wall seem to glow. She is calm. She is focused. She is happy. She is no longer the sad, lost girl who waited on tables in a dying diner. She is not just her father's daughter. She is a woman who walked across the country and back. She is a woman who learned to turn her own grief into a gift for others. She is an artist. She is a storyteller. She is a map maker for